Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Thank you to the nominees, to Mr. Tongue and to Mr. Dunlap, for you and your family's willingness to serve. Mr. Tongue, in particular, thank you for your service at DOJ. I just wanted to ask both of you, if I could. The record reflects you both met with President Trump on July 2nd to discuss your nominations. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
That is correct.
Who attended that meeting, Mr. Dunlap? Where did it occur, and what was the topic of discussion?
We met in the Oval Office. I believe we were accompanied by the Chief Counsel, and we generally discussed background judicial philosophy.
Mr. Tongue, what did you discuss at the meeting, and what sort of questions were you asked?
Senator, we discussed my background and qualifications.
As far as I can tell, during both the Biden administration and the first Trump administration, personal meetings by the President of the United States with circuit court nominees were exceedingly rare. Why do you think, Mr. Tongue, that President Trump wanted to meet with you personally?
I don't know, Senator.
Mr. Dunlap?
I agree, I don't know.
Anything that struck you as unusual about the questioning around your judicial philosophy?
No, I was honored to be able to appear in the Oval Office.
It is an honor to be in the Oval Office. I can agree with that. Mr. Tongue, when you were in private practice, you represented a number of cryptocurrency clients, including a Coinbase employee who later pled guilty to wire fraud. If confirmed, would it be your intention to recuse yourself from any cases related to cryptocurrency?
Senator, recusal will be assessed again if I'm so fortunate to be confirmed on a case-by-case basis based on the facts and based on the degree of the relationship I might have with the matter at hand.
But does it seem to you that having had a number of cryptocurrency clients, the presumption should be in favor of recusal?
Not necessarily, Senator. It is a fact-specific inquiry that I would engage in
I know.
carefully.
I'm familiar with the inquiry. What about cases brought by Jones Day?
I may recuse for a time in cases brought by my firm, Jones Day.
Why would the recusal be time-bound?
Well, because after a period of time, the conflict of interest and the perception of the conflict of interest may have dissipated and be banished.
Can you give me any
entirely.
sense of what that period of time might be in your estimation?
I will assess that question, Senator, and I will consult my colleagues on how to apply that particular statute.
What sort of factors do you think you would weigh when considering whether to recuse from a case involving Coinbase or Jones Day? Just give me a little more color as to what kinds of things would cause you to conclude you had a potential conflict of interest or an appearance.
Sure. The parties, the relationship that I may or may not have with the parties involved, the kinds of legal issues that are implicated in the case at hand, whether I had been personally involved in the matter as a private litigant. I think all those would be factors that I would consider. Mr.
Dunlap, I want to talk about one of the pillars of our judicial system, stare decisis. You've written a blog post for your firm about when it might be appropriate for a court to overturn established precedent. If confirmed, when would it be appropriate for you to draft an opinion overturning First Circuit precedent?
So First Circuit precedent could only be overturned en banc, and the court would consider the importance of the issue raised, would consider potential conflicts with other cases and determining whether or not to take it en banc. And if the court did take a case en banc, you would consider a variety of factors. You would consider reliance interest. You would consider the quality of the legal reasoning. You would consider subsequent...
Help me understand, Mr. Dunlap, if you might forgive me, the contours of reliance interest.
So the reliance interest is the extent to which parties may have shaped their conduct in a way that is relying upon the existence of a particular precedent.
And would a precedent that had been well settled for, let's say, 50 years be one that would likely have produced reliance interest?
That would be a possibility. It would certainly be a consideration that the court would need to take into account.
What would you do if asked to apply Supreme Court precedent with which you disagree?
I would be bound by the rulings of the Supreme Court.
And what are the contours of being bound?
I mean, you need to look as a judge at the facts and the legal reasoning of the case, determine how it applies to the case before you. But the court's holding is binding on lower courts.
Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hermendorfer, thank you for your service in the Tennessee Attorney General's office, and congratulations to you and your family for your nomination. As you may know, I am not a reflexive no vote on nominees of a president of the other party. I've supported President Trump's judicial nominees in his first term when they had the qualifications and experience for the job and the character and the independence to carry out the role of a judge, particularly a circuit judge, with integrity. I am concerned about the striking brevity of your professional record. You graduated from law school just a decade ago, and you spent 4 years with impressive clerkships, but often nominees for a position such as the circuit have real experience in court. Have you ever served as the sole or chief counsel in any case tried to a jury verdict?
Not to a jury verdict, Senator.
Have you ever served as the sole or chief counsel in any case tried to a final judgment?
I've served as chief counsel in many final judgment cases in trial court. If you mean a bench trial, I'm sorry, I don't understand. A bench trial would be no, but final judgment, yes.
How many direct examinations have you personally taken in federal court?
As an appellate lawyer, I don't usually take direct examinations, and the answer is 0.
How many cross-examinations have you taken in federal court?
None.
How many depositions have you taken?
Again, as an appellate lawyer, that's not really part of my practice.
How many depositions have you defended?
I have not defended depositions.
How many federal appellate oral arguments have you presented?
Federal appellate oral arguments, that would be 4.
And how many Supreme Court oral arguments have you presented?
None, though I've second chaired and been counsel of record in Supreme Court matters.
I'll just point out that the jurist you've been nominated to replace, Judge Jane Straunch, had 31 years of legal experience under her belt when nominated to this position in the Sixth Circuit. And the ABA, although disregarded by some, has long had a standard that without more than a dozen years of federal service, they would deem someone unqualified for positions such as what you've been nominated for. Let me move to a different issue. The Federal Rule of Civil Procedure number 65 sets out the rules of the road for issuing TROs and PIs, including whether a party moving must post a security bond. What factors should an appellate judge consider when ruling on a challenge to a security bond set or not set by a district court under FRCP 65C before issuing a TRO or a PI?
So this comes up sometimes when the state is a litigant, and oftentimes parties can move to waive the security bond. And what a court is looking to is the gravity of harm to the potential appellant should the disposition in the district court be allowed to move forward. So it's similar to kind of the equitable considerations of harm and the gravity of that harm, and whether it would be reparable or compensable on the other end.
And thank you. And in what sorts of cases is it typical to set or require a security bond?
So I think cases in which there's going to be financial exposure, for example, on behalf of an appellant, could be such a case where a bond might be posted.
Contract case or a case involving infringement of a patent or something like that. Does your analysis change if the matter is a constitutional case brought by a private plaintiff against allegedly unconstitutional actions of the federal government?
So it's, I would have to take each constitutional violation and ruling on its own terms and wouldn't want to prejudge, but the equitable factors, of course, would be the ones that I would apply in such a situation.
How would you set a bond for something as foundational as a violation of the Constitution?
I'm not sure I could answer that in the abstract, Senator.
And I'm not sure district court judges could answer that either. What tools does the Sixth Circuit or any circuit have to enforce its judgments if you were confirmed and a party disobeys an order of the Sixth Circuit, perhaps even one you wrote? What would you do?
Well, I know that there are mechanisms by which, of course, judgments are entered and executed and enforced through federal district courts.
And what are those mechanisms?
Well, the federal district court sometimes can issue contempt rulings, for example, that are appealable. And if you're talking about warrants or orders of those sort, I know the U.S. Marshal's Office has some sort of involvement in that, but I confess this hasn't been part of something that I've litigated.
And when would you feel you'd met the standard to call in the marshals to execute your judgment?
I think it's very difficult, again, to answer that question in the abstract. And I can just tell you as a party, I've followed the appellate process whenever I felt as though a judgment had gone the wrong way against me, and I've secured appellate relief in those situations.
Last question. What would you do if the U.S. Marshals were to disobey and refuse to execute the judgment of the circuit court if they were instructed by the DOJ to stand down and to refuse to implement an order of the court?
That would, as a probably junior appellate judge on my court, be something that I would look to my colleagues and whatever governing rules and precedents would govern that situation. But again, on the abstract, as a hypothetical matter.
Ms. Hermendorfer, I hope this is an abstract and hypothetical matter, but it's one that occupies quite a few of us and quite a bit of our discussion on this committee as we come up against the question of whether or not we have a president willing to disobey orders of federal courts. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hermendorfer, we're going to go to Senator Moody, but let me just ask you beforehand, just to make sure that I'm clear. My colleague was just asking about the number of cases that you've tried to a jury and cross-examinations performed before a jury and direct examinations performed before a jury. What court are you being nominated to?
The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals.
A Court of Appeals. Do you have any appellate experience at all?
I have litigated probably over 100 appellate cases.
Over 100 appellate cases. How many different courts of appeals, how many circuits, how many different circuits have you argued or litigated in front of?
I've argued in front of 9 circuits in the Supreme Court.
Nine circuits.
Not argued, litigated.
Litigated. 9 circuits in the Supreme Court, over 100 appellate cases. That sounds like quite a bit of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, just a quick question to clarify something. Is a full year continuing resolution bad for the Department of Defense? Just yes or no?
Sir, a full year continuing resolution is never preferable for any department, especially the Department of Defense. Not preferable.
And I know, General Kane, I don't need to ask you because your written testimony specifically says routinely operating under continuing resolutions lowers buying power, results in less deployable capital, makes it harder for industry to make long-term investments. And is it your commitment, Mr. Secretary, that you'll work with us to achieve a full year appropriation? You'll submit the budget documents necessary, work with us closely, that we'll be able to do our work so you can do yours.
Senator, we are committed to working with you to make sure the Defense Department gets as robust a budget as possible where we can meet the threats of today and tomorrow.
Thank you. I'll just say at the outset for all my colleagues, I am increasingly concerned that there is a threat that some believe they can best govern by continuing resolution, reconciliation, and rescission, and not ever actually have us appropriate. So I look forward to working with you to avoid that outcome, which I think would both disregard the role of Congress and put all of us at greater risk. It seems to me clear with regards to Ukraine that Vladimir Putin has no serious intent of negotiating. He continues to attack civilian targets night after night with hundreds and hundreds of drones. The Ukrainians have just carried out a spectacular attack against military targets. And it seems to me concerning that the 2026 request eliminates aid to Ukraine entirely. At the same time, the Senate has a strongly bipartisan bill led by Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal to impose more sanctions on Russia, and many senators of both parties want to provide more aid to Ukraine. Would you agree, Mr. Secretary, that the United States should use every tool it has at its disposal, including additional sanctions, to pressure Russia to come to the table to negotiate a just and lasting peace for the war in Ukraine?
Senator, every tool at our disposal? No. We have a lot of tools in a lot of places.
Let me be more narrow. Let me be more narrow then.
Apply.
You said, and I'll take some exception to this, that our European allies cannot freeload off the United States in perpetuity. My impression is that Article 5 of the NATO treaty was only invoked once. It was after 9/11. And a significant number of our European allies and partners deployed to Afghanistan alongside us and suffered significant combat casualties. In the first 2 years of the war in Ukraine, a war of Russian aggression, 50 other countries stepped forward, deployed military support, delivered materiel, provided financial and operating support. And at regular meetings of the Defense Contact Group, your predecessor led that process of deploying military assistance. What message do you think it sends? That as Ukraine continues to suffer day after day of punishing attacks on civilian centers, we're not using the $3.8 billion in presidential drawdown authority that remains to send additional air defense and interceptors, and you yourself chose to not attend the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Mr. Secretary, why not use the already appropriated presidential drawdown authority to deliver defense material badly needed by Ukraine?
Well, Senator, as you know, the presidential drawdown authorities 71 through 74 still apply, and they are still flowing. There's some in reserve. To your question about my statement, and I served with a lot of NATO allies in Afghanistan as well. Incredibly capable Canadians, Brits, and Australians, and others. And grateful for them, and I've gotten to know a lot of them in this process going to Brussels. Amazing people, amazing countries.
Thus, I was struck, Mr. Secretary.
But we also wore a patch on our shoulder that said ISAF, International Security Assistance Force. And you know what the joke was? That it stood for I Saw Americans Fighting. Because what ultimately was a lot of flags, was not a lot of on-the-ground capability. You're not a real coalition, you're not a real alliance, unless you have real defense capability and real armies that can bring those to bear. And that's a reality that Europe is waking up to quickly, and we're glad, because they're our friends, and we want them to be safe and free and secure. And sometimes that takes true talk and tough love, and they've responded very well to that because we want them to succeed. And
Mr. Secretary, let's just make clear for the record that our military partners in Afghanistan included many who served and died. Our Danish partners and allies on a per capita basis
Don't try to make it look like I don't care about the investments of our partners. Of course I do.
Mr.
I recognize
Secretary,
that there were lives lost from other countries.
Of
but
course
the bulk of the effort was Americans. And an alliance needs to include other countries and be more balanced.
Mr. Secretary,
to be a real alliance.
as I pointed out in my opening comments, our partners and allies have stepped up, have invested, have engaged in the defense of Ukraine, and so should we. We should not be pursuing a ceasefire and a negotiated resolution to the war in Ukraine at any cost. Peace through strength means actually using our strength, continuing to support Ukraine, and securing a lasting peace. Putin will only stop when we stop him. And the best way to stop him is indeed through a stronger NATO. I look forward to the NATO summit. I agree with you that a significant investment by NATO in our collective security is a great investment, but we cannot abandon Ukraine. That would put us significantly at a strategic disadvantage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Schutz, and good to be with you again, Secretary Rubio. I wanted to make sure that the point's been made, as I suspect it has been by my colleague, that reform to USAID and reform to some of the authorities and the spending in the legislation that we passed in the last Congress is something that could easily have been done with partnership with this committee and with Congress, and should have been done that way. I wanted to touch on a few things that you and I worked on that I think deserve continued support and that I think are important for us to sustain. Senator Graham and I worked to pass the Global Fragility Act in 2019. You were a co-sponsor. It was signed into law by President Trump. And it's designed to save literally billions of dollars by addressing root causes of terrorism in fragile countries. As you put it at the time, as the U.S. responds to humanitarian crises, we must address the factors driving instability and violence. It's both moral and international security to promote stable and prosperous countries, and I'm proud to introduce this legislation. I'm planning to work with Senator Graham on reauthorizing it this year. The primary implementing entity had long been the Bureau of Conflict Operations and Stabilization. That's a bureau that's been restructured. Do you still agree it's in our national interest to have a targeted strategy to address the root causes of terrorism? And will you work with us to sustain the capabilities we need in the State Department to continue the Global Fragility Act's work?
Yes, and let me add to that because it's a good example. Number one, part of the reorg, just because we got rid of an office, named something, doesn't mean the function goes away. It means that we want to drive that through the regional bureau. So a great example of global fragility I keep going back to this over and over again, is Syria.
Yep.
And if we don't, if that fragility is not addressed, there's going to be terror. There already is. I mean, ISIS is already growing there and potentially growing even more dangerous. If there's a civil war in Syria, you're going to have an ungoverned space where multiple groups are going to break out and not just threaten the region, but ultimately potentially the homeland. So it's a great example of how global fragility can be applied to the real world, but we have to do it very quickly. We have to be able to act quickly in this regard, which is one of the things we hope to do by being able to drive this down to the regional and local levels.
I also work closely with Chairman Graham, with Chairman McCall, with Ranking Member Meeks, and over 100 co-sponsors of both parties to enact the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation. It was enacted through the NDAA. There's funding allocated to it. You stated in your confirmation on January 15th that this was the sort of public-private partnership that struck you as deserving of support, and I would hope you would move quickly to execute creating it. It simply requires your signature, and obligating the funds and appointing the board. Chairman Graham and I are also working on a similar bill that would address food insecurity, again through a public-private partnership, a foundation that would rely on as much private sector funding and philanthropy as government funding. Do you still support these foundations, and is this something you look forward to working with?
And we'll get you an answer. I mean, we'll get you a decision on that very quickly, which is what you're looking for, is us to go through and try to implement the law.
Yes.
I recall the plan correctly. We'll get to that fairly quickly. We've had a lot going on over the last 4 months, but we'll get to it, including 100 and something reports that we inherited that were overdue. We're working through those as well. But because you raised it here today, if you give me a few days, I'll get you an action on it.
Thank you. We have spoken about the MCC. The Millennium Challenge Corporation is a Bush-era initiative that used metrics and accountability, working against corruption and in long-term partnership with countries to give them an alternative to Chinese financing. As you've described it, and I agree, debt trap financing. There's current compacts active in countries like Indonesia, the Solomon Islands, Nepal, Kiribati, where it gives transparency and cost sharing. You are the chair of the board of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I understand from our discussion this morning that you're aware it's in some transition. Can you just confirm it's going through reform and will not be shut down wholesale?
Yeah, I can confirm. We're on the board. We don't operate it, obviously. We're on the board, but it's not a State Department function. We are one of the board members. I'll be at the chair, and actually our deputy, Chris Landau, is serving in that role when I'm not available to be at these meetings and so forth. My understanding as of the latest updates that I've gotten with the work that's being done is it is undergoing a reform effort, or streamline effort, but not a takedown effort.
I think it would be an unforced error for us to hand away the relationships and the competition with China that are metrics-based and transparent that the MCC has put in place, so I hope to work with you on that. Last, your testimony highlights an America First Opportunity Fund as a flexible and responsive account that will address waste in foreign assistance and be more agile. But at least as I see it in your proposal, the account replaces $9 billion of programs with a $3 billion account to cover everything from countering the PRC, countering Russia, aiding Jordan and others. Could you just briefly describe how you imagine that math working and how this fund being sufficient to meet a wide menu of needs?
Well, part of it is we found that some of these programs underneath it they were scattered, some of them were duplicative, there were some inefficiencies. So we truly believe, now what the right number is, obviously, that's what we'll have to work with you on, but we truly believe that we can deliver on the same goals for substantially less than what those combined pre-existing funds or projects would have cost. But what it's going to enable us to do is to ensure that assistance funds are directed towards the highest priority projects that we may have on any given basis, on any given moment, given global events that are happening. It provides enough, in addition to these existing programs, it provides us being nimble enough to deal with a contingency in a world that rapidly evolves, as opposed to having to go back and repurpose existing funds to do it. So that's really the goal of the fund, is to be able to move at the speed of relevance when it comes to global events and not have to wait for the next funding cycle to come across or work through some reprogramming process that could take time for us to be able to respond quickly.
I do think, as a former senator, I hope you'll agree that there has to be a modicum of consultation, review, and approval by this subcommittee and others. But the target of agility, responding to world events, I suspect you'll get bipartisan support for that. But there needs to be a congressional role in oversight and accountability. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Attorney General Bondi, and to your family
Thank
and
you.
supporters. Thank you for your service, and I look forward to our conversation today. I have a simple three-factor test when considering the executive branch nominees before us. Do you have the qualifications and experience to do the job, policy views to do the job in the best interest of the American people, and the character and integrity to conduct your job, and yours in particular, with the independence that the role requires? You demonstrably have the relevant experience. I understand we will not see eye to eye on some or even many policies, but we had a constructive conversation last week about our shared interest in fighting the opioid epidemic, countering human trafficking, criminal justice reform, and supporting law enforcement. But I need to know that you share a core value, ensuring the Department of Justice remains free from partisan or political influence, in particular by the White House. So I look forward to our discussion about that today. As Attorney General, if confirmed, who would be your client?
My oath would be to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. The people of America would be my client. And it is also my job to advise the president. My client are the people of America.
A simple question of constitutional interpretation. Is President-elect Trump eligible to run for another term as president in 2028?
No, Senator, not unless they change the Constitution.
Thank you. One of the concerns I've raised with you is safeguarding the Department of Justice's independence in the face of some promises on the campaign trail by then-candidate Trump that he would use the department to target his political adversaries, or that he might interfere with prosecution. What would you do if your career DOJ prosecutors came to you with a case to prosecute, grounded in the facts and law, but the White House directs you to drop the case?
Senator, if I thought that would happen, I would not be sitting here today. That will not happen, will not happen. Every case will be prosecuted based on the facts and the law that is applied in good faith, period. Politics have got to be taken out of the system.
I agree with you.
This department has been weaponized for years and years and years,
But let
and
me,
it has
if
to
I
stop.
might, thank you. Let me, if I might, Madam Attorney General, refer you back to Senator Durbin's opening comments about previous attorneys general, our former colleague, Jeff Sessions, Bill Barr. I don't think it's credible to say that it may never happen that the president-elect would direct an unethical or illegal act. I think both of those attorneys general found themselves crosswise with the then president by doing things he didn't welcome or approve of. Just answer the question for me, if you would. I know you may not expect it. I know you wouldn't have accepted this nomination if you thought it possible. But let's imagine that once again, President-elect Trump issues a directive or order to you or to the FBI director that is outside the boundaries of ethics or law. What will you do?
Senator, I will never speak on a hypothetical, especially one saying that the president would do something illegal. What I can tell you is my duty, if confirmed as the Attorney General, will be to the Constitution and the United States of America. And the most important oath, part of that oath that I will take, are the last four words, "So help me God."
Given the importance of that oath, I hope you can understand the importance of repeated questions from some of us about the importance of having independence in the Department of Justice. It has a long tradition of independent special prosecutors, especially to handle high-profile or often political cases. If you got credible evidence of a criminal violation by a White House official, including even the president, would you bring in a special prosecutor?
Senator, that's a hypothetical. I can tell you what I do know is special prosecutors have been abused in the past on both sides. We have seen that for many, many years. They have cost the taxpayers countless dollars, countless. And I will look at each situation on a case-by-case basis and consult the appropriate career ethics officials within the department to make that decision.
Attorney General, do you think special counsels need to be confirmed by the Senate?
I will follow the law, and I will consult with the appropriate ethics officials regarding the law. Right now, they do not need to be Senate confirmed, of course.
But you did sign an 11th Circuit brief arguing that they should be.
I will follow the law, Senator. That's why I said that.
Understood, but I was just getting to the clarity about the difference between a
Absolutely.
position you've advocated and what the current law is. Thank you for that. Look, bluntly, to me, refusing to answer a hypothetical when there is clear and concrete previous history raises some concerns for me. I think Chris Wray has done an outstanding job as FBI director at avoiding political pressure. And although he was chosen by President Trump, he's being driven out so that he can be replaced. My perception, I've not yet met with Mr. Patel, by a loyalist who has publicly said he will do what the president asks him. Given that Attorney General Barr was asked to go find evidence of election interference and improprieties, went and looked for the evidence and said, I can't find any, and was then dismissed, I'm just going to ask you one last time. Can you clarify for me that in following ethics and the law, you'd be willing to resign if ordered to do something improper?
Senator, I wouldn't work at a law firm. I wouldn't be a prosecutor. I wouldn't be attorney general. If anyone asked me to do something improper and I felt I had to carry that out, of course I would not do that. That's one of the main things you learn when you're a young prosecutor, is to do the right thing. And I believe that has continued with me throughout my very long career.
As we discussed, protecting American invention and innovation, American intellectual property, is a real concern of mine and of several others on this committee. I look forward to talking with you about that pressing concern. But the most important question I had for you today is whether you will be willing and able to stand up to politicization and interference in the Department of Justice. And I look forward to further clarification from you about the specifics of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator.
Senator Cruz would be next, but he's not here, so I call on Senator Kennedy.
These dialogues with the great scientists there. So
Thanks again.
thank you for the great comments.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Kennedy, Ranking Member Murray. Secretary Wright, good to be with you. I just want to briefly frame, as I understand it, the Department of Energy plays three critical overall functions: maintaining our national security through the Nuclear Security Administration, investing in critical public-private partnerships that will demonstrate and deploy the next generation of energy technologies, nuclear, geothermal, oil and gas, hydrogen, and funding research, both fundamental and applied at our national labs and through many great university partnerships that ensures we remain the global leader in R&D. These functions are critical to your three major goals that I share: out-competing China, reducing energy costs for Americans, and eliminating energy poverty across the world. And based on your background as an MIT-trained engineer and successful energy entrepreneur, I think you and I share these goals. But my core concern is that the way DOGE has impacted your workforce and the folks you've got available to carry these goals out undermine these critical goals. My understanding, and now I'm on a number of different appropriation subcommittees, and so far in every single one of them, we don't have a budget. Do you have a budget before us today, or is it a skinny budget?
So far, just the skinny budget. We're working with OMB to release more of that, but that's still a work in progress.
And it's awful skinny. I mean, it's about a page. So I'm working off of an outline, but I'm alarmed by a proposed cut of more than $1 billion to the Office of Science. That's more than 8% compared to enacted, at a time when China is investing in R&D, and combined with what is going on at NSF, an independent agency, I'm concerned we're kneecapping the American science enterprise, which played such a critical role in our success in the 20th century. The skinny budget claims that your cut will only affect climate change and new green scam research, but it doesn't define those terms, and I'm concerned we'll end up defunding critical research. The University of Delaware, my home state's leading research university, and many others in my state and around the country are alarmed by Executive Order 14222, which lowers the F&A caps on federal grants. How will your department implement this EO in a way that doesn't disproportionately impact R1 universities but that are smaller and less well-researched than the handful of critical institutions that really have long demanded the lion's share of federal research dollars.
You're talking about the overhead percentage on
Yes.
things? When we sent it out, we invited all of the universities to reach back out to us to engage in a dialogue like I think you're proposing. So far, no one has taken us up on that effort.
Not one university has reached back out to you to say, here's how we would do it in a way that would minimize the impact?
Many sued us, but
Many sued you.
But I'm not sure.
That's
I'm not
one form of outreach.
I'm not aware of any dialogues on that. You know, and it is a sticky question, Senator Coons. And look, it's a great university, and I'm fully sympathetic of where you're coming from. And it's part of of course, it's part of this broader effort that we want to get. And going back to your national lab science question, that'll be done bottom up at every lab. I share that national labs are a treasure. We don't want to slow down any of our critical research, but is there some fat in there? Is there stuff we're working on that's not really basic science or critical to our energy thing? I think there is, and I haven't found a lab director yet that disagrees with me.
I have visited 4 of the national labs, been very impressed with them, look forward to continuing to support funding for them and engage with them, but I have 2 more questions and I'll keep moving with my remaining minute.
You bet.
The bipartisan infrastructure law created hydrogen hubs and tasked DOE with implementing them, and I worked with bipartisan delegations from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, with unions, with universities, with our oil refineries, 3 of them, and we ultimately secured an award from DOE for the Mid-Atlantic Clean Hydrogen Hub. I want to thank you for sending the pre-award funding that was just received last week. Overall, this grant and leveraged private partnership would get $750 million in federal, $2 billion in leveraged private investment over a decade to create thousands of good-paying jobs. My concern is that the Hubs program is a key part of reindustrialization. And I legislatively helped create the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, or OSED, in statute, and I'm concerned the workforce has been hollowed out and that they won't be able to actually implement this and other programs. There's others I could cite, the Loan Program Office, the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, and others, with something like 4,000 DOE employees encouraged to retire or terminated. You've lost about 20% of your workforce. How can nuclear, we'll take nuclear, as an emerging critical American competitive technology be supported by the Loan Program Office when the House Reconciliation Bill would gut it and your budget zeroes it out? How does LPO function at the cutting edge of energy?
I think LPO is critical at the cutting edge of energy. It is really the most efficient tool we have in the department to help emerging energy technologies. So I absolutely want to see funding. I want to see the Loan Program Office able to lean in on emerging technologies. It is our greatest bang for the buck to help technologies. So, and I know that comes to the Senate next. I'm making a plea. I would very much...
Don't enact the budget we send, enact the budget you know we need. And we may end up, forgive me, just speaking for myself in the last 10 seconds, Mr. Chairman, we may end up saying you must have this many people here and this many people here and this many people here, because when certain functions get down to a handful of people, I'd love us to see that the LPO is actually able to meet the mission.
We will be able to meet the mission.
Makowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciated that exchange.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman Hagerty, Ranking Member Reed. Secretary Bessent, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Senator, nice to see you.
Chairman Hagerty, I'm impressed at your streamlining this hearing. It was striking. And I'm glad we're able to get right into the meat of the conversation. We are today spending more on the interest on our national debt than we are on our national defense. And I applaud your stated support for reducing the federal deficit and trying to get a handle on our national debt, but I struggle to square that with your support for tax policies that will, under CBO's analysis, add at least $2.4 trillion to our debt in the next decade. And given that credit rating agencies have just downgraded U.S. debt, I am concerned that by continuing to pile debt onto our national balance sheet, we will undermine growth, we will damage our ability to borrow, and we will lay the foundation for the next fiscal crisis. Do you share any of those concerns, and how do you see us making progress in improving our overall fiscal balance sheet.
Senator, I don't think you and I met in person. I think we had a long...
We have met, yeah.
Yeah, we did meet, and we also had a very long phone conversation,
yes.
I remember. The reason I'm sitting here today is because I became very concerned about our government's finances, and that in the trailing year, we will have had the highest deficit to GDP when we were not at war and not
yes.
in a recession.
Right.
And so this is what we have inherited. If we look at the CBO scoring, and I'm not making a judgment on the good people who work at CBO, I'm making a judgment on their models. The models assume a static 1.7 or 1.8% growth, right. whether we pass the one big beautiful bill or it fails. No matter what, we always grow at 1.8%. I believe through higher growth and the cost cutting that we are doing, that we can bring that under control. And I would note that if we want to use CBO scoring, CBO scoring, which I don't agree with, is at 2.4 trillion over the 10-year window. The CBO also scores the president's tariffs at 2.8 trillion. So that would be a surplus of 400 billion.
Let me move on to some more focused questions on specific things in your agency. I would welcome a chance about the broader economic picture, because I frankly don't believe the tariff income assessment. I do believe the tax, but we can debate. We literally could debate this longer than I believe I have.
But
let's move to sanctions.
If we want to agree on CBO, we have to agree on CBO.
And I'll take that point. Secretary Rubio testified recently the Trump administration has not lifted any sanctions against Russia. Is that true?
Not to my knowledge.
And sanctions, which I've long followed, I've served on this subcommittee for many years. It's not a static game. For every company that's sanctioned, typically they then move to set up a front company, to find another avenue. And with the Russians in particular, they're quite skilled at sanctions evasion by setting up new companies in other countries, including in the PRC. And for every sector that's sanctioned, there's a whole cottage industry devoted to evading them. Effective sanctions depend on follow-up, enforcement, and pursuit, which is why you have a whole talented team at Treasury focused on finding evaders and front companies, redesignating them publicly, closing the loopholes. Treasury and state were rolling out new sanctions designations every few weeks, much of last year. How many new Russian entities have you designated under your sanctions authority since January?
I will get back to you with that number.
The answer is 0.
Yep.
How many entities worldwide have you sanctioned for doing business with Russian companies in ways that undermine our sanctions and export controls?
I will get back to you with that number.
I believe the answer is 0. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love it if you'd get back to me and tell me I'm wrong. But the PRC is helping Russia's defense industry by providing dual-use components and advanced technologies. Last week, Chancellor Merz briefed a bipartisan group of us on Russia's alarming rearmament with help from China, Iran, and North Korea. How many Chinese firms have been designated for doing work directly with Russia's defense industry?
I will get back to you on that. I will tell you that we have sanctioned numerous Chinese companies for receiving Iranian oil, and we have been working on the shadow fleets are not independent.
Yes.
And I believe in what you said, the Russians and the Iranians are very good at evading sanctions with these so-called shadow fleets. So we are working on we have been pushing on those. We have sanctioned what are called teapot refineries in China. So these are non-state owned, privately owned refineries. This is a new innovative measure that we have done. We have chosen not to go after Chinese government-owned. We are also working on tracking down the owners of these refineries, whether they have any assets in the U.S., in Western Europe, and moving on those very
I look forward to talking to you further about sanctions enforcement. 2 last questions, Mr. Chairman. Since I'm the only senator remaining, I will make them brief. IMF, I just met with the head of the IMF. The IMF is a sound investment in global financial stability. We receive billions in interest every year from them on credit that they extend. In 2023, members agreed to increase quota, the capital contributions to the fund. It's my understanding that the Treasury Department and the White House have shown support for a measure to increase quota. Can you just confirm it is, in fact, administration priority to increase our IMF quota?
Yes. So across the multilateral
yes.
the development banks, we believe that it is a very good way of leveraging tax dollars for U.S. power. And the managing director would have told you, or you may have seen that I gave a speech about 8 weeks ago during IMF World Bank Week.
She did.
That we are going to go back to basics, and we believe that they should be helping developing countries when they have a sudden stop and with development issues. Same for World Bank.
I would love to work with you, Mr. Secretary, on making sure that the authorization for that increase actually happens this year so that we can move forward in our partnership. The Direct File program allows Americans with very simple tax returns to file their taxes for free. It's been a great success. According to IRS research, 94% of Direct File users rate their experience as excellent or above average. For a government tool for paying taxes, that's pretty darn good. You've expressed support for streamlining IRS operations, and Direct File seems to support that mission. Do you continue to support Direct File, or should I be concerned about rumors that the administration plans to end it?
We are looking at Direct File. We wanted to wait until we got beyond the window of tax filing season, so we are doing an assessment of that now. I will get back to you on that. One of the goals is to have more electronic filing because I'm cuffing the numbers, but in order of magnitude, an electronic filer who doesn't get a refund may cost us under $1.
Yep.
A paper filer who does get maybe up to $80. So I will get back to you on that.
Thank you, because I do think it's a successful program and reduces costs and makes it easier for taxpayers. Thank you for your forbearance, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the nominees, your families, your willingness to serve our nation. And if I might, Mr. Waltz, or forgive me, Colonel, Congressman Waltz, my thanks to you and to your wife, Julia, who's also served our nation, as you mentioned in introduction, in combat, and to your family. I want to get to the larger questions of the UN and the UN mission, but in your role in the Army, in the House, as National Security Advisor, you have long handled classified and highly sensitive information. We both know Signal is not an appropriate, secure means of communicating highly sensitive information, and yet on March 24th, the Atlantic magazine published a series of Signal messages, including sensitive information about a U.S. military operation against the Houthis in Yemen, involving you and several other Trump officials. Were you investigated for this disclosure of sensitive operational information on Signal?
Thank you, Senator. And that engagement was driven by and recommended by the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency, by the Biden administration, CISA guidance.
I'm sorry.
And I have here, well, just the use of Signal.
Share information on Signal?
The use of, no, excuse me, the use of Signal is not only, as an encrypted app, is not only authorized, it was recommended in Biden's, the Biden-era CISA guidance. And in fact, if you just, it says here, I'll read it to you, use only end-to-end encrypted communications, adopt a free messaging application to secure communications that guarantees end-to-end encryption, particularly if you are a highly targeted individual, such as Signal or similar apps. CISA recommends end-to-end encryption messaging on both government and personal devices.
For sensitive military
operational
information?
Of course, Senator. There was no classified information exchange.
For sensitive military this, you were sharing details about an upcoming airstrike and the time of launch and the potential targets. I mean, this was demonstrably sensitive information. And the question I asked was, were you investigated for this expansion of the Signal Group to include a journalist?
The White House conducted an investigation, and my understanding is the Department of Defense is still conducting an investigation.
Was any disciplinary action taken?
From the White House Investigation Center?
Yes.
No, the use of Signal was not only authorized, it's still authorized and highly recommended.
Would you recommend the use of Signal for classified information to be shared between folks who have access to?
Again, we followed the recommendation, almost the demand, to use end-to-end encryption, but there was no classified information shared.
Did you speak to Secretary Hegseth about his decision to share detailed information on the specifics of an imminent military strike?
What we spoke about, Senator, was a highly successful mission that did something that the Biden administration did not do, was actually target the Houthi leadership. We subsequently saw a ceasefire, an increase in shipping, and a drop in attacks on our ships.
Well, look, here's what I hear on this exchange, and I want to get to the UN point. At the time, you took responsibility for having added a journalist inadvertently to a Signal chat. But it doesn't seem to me that the administration's taken any action to make sure this doesn't happen again. There's been no consequences, and yet the president continues to denounce those who leak information. We both know Signal is not a secure way to convey classified information. And I was hoping to hear from you that you had some sense of regret over sharing what was very sensitive, timely information about a military strike on a commercially available app that's not, as we both know, the appropriate way to share such critical information.
Again, Senator, I think where we have a fundamental disagreement is there was no classified information on that chat.
I'm going to move on for a moment, but we've got plenty more to discuss on that point. China in the UN system, there was plenty of agreement on this side of the dais, and I think with you, that we need to combat anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias in the UN. We need to ensure taxpayer dollars are well spent. We need to engage in our world, and from your service on the China Task Force, you know very well what a central challenge for us China is. Yet across organizations, the ITU, the FAO, UNESCO, WIPO, I think the only way we successfully push back on China's influence is by being at the table, driving reform. When President Trump withdrew from the World Health Organization, the Chinese sent their largest delegation ever to the next meeting. They've contributed $500 million. They're now the biggest contributor. I can understand some of the frustrations or concerns that led to the withdrawal from UNESCO, but in the last Congress, with Israeli support, I led our rejoining UNESCO. We've talked about, you've mentioned earlier today, standard-setting bodies as being essential. How do you balance a budget request that dramatically reduces our contributions to the UN with needing to be at the table to fight for the standards, whether it's telecommunications, civil aviation, intellectual property? You just waved, here's this great big list of organizations. Many of them do critical things. How are you going to strike that balance appropriately, sir?
Thank you, Senator, and it was good to discuss this with you. I will point out in the President's budget request there is funding for IAEA, for the International Civil Aviation Organization, for the Organization Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, for the ITU, for the IMO and Maritime, and so I look forward to working with you and working with this committee on how we make those decisions of where we engage and then how we engage. But I think we're in violent agreement that we have to block and tackle Chinese influence.
Would you pledge to not support just unilateral withdrawal from these organizations?
I will certainly support and follow the Secretary and the President's guidance as we weigh that engagement through these reviews.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts, and thank you to all of you for your willingness to serve our nation, represent us overseas. I will focus on the nominees for UN posts, but no disrespect to the others. Thank you for your willingness to serve. Mr. Bartos, we've known each other well. You were introduced by both the Democrat and Republican senators of Pennsylvania. Congratulations. Folks against whom you ran in a previous cycle, double congratulations. And to you and your family. The UN is a crucial area, in my view, for the United States to advance its national interests. And as you cited in your opening comments, The UN Charter focuses on promoting peace, security, and stability, and we need a UN that is focused on those priorities. I was encouraged that you also emphasized the importance of expanding the number of Americans who are in the UN system globally. Over the last 15 years that I've served on this committee, over several administrations, my view is that when we withdraw from the UN, our adversaries simply advance and fill the gaps that we create. So your challenge is going to be to balance ensuring that the money that we invest in the UN and the systems and organizations at the UN are efficient, are transparent, are delivering on their mission, but to not abandon that mission, to not completely withdraw. One of my core concerns is that the US-UN reform process might look like what happened to the USAID. We could have had a balanced, bipartisan, measured process that looked hard at inefficiency in USAID, narrowed its focus, and prioritized an American national interests. Instead, it was simply slashed and shut down, largely with no consultation with Congress. If confirmed, will you commit to engaging with Congress regularly on reform efforts to ensure that there's bipartisan support, both for sustained U.S. leadership in the UN system and for any reforms that are proposed and that you're carrying out?
Senator, thank you for your question, and I'm smiling here because we've known each other 20 years.
Yep.
And who would have thought 20 years ago when we were working on sewer issues in Newcastle County, Delaware, that we'd be sitting here. So it's an honor to be with you.
God indeed has a sense of humor.
Yes, yes, sir. And it's wonderful to see you, and thank you for your question. Yes, I can strongly commit, and if confirmed, look forward to working with the committee to address all of these issues. I'm inspired by Secretary Rubio's leadership. I'm deeply grateful to President Trump for his leadership, and if confirmed, I look forward to working as often as you'll have me with this committee to address these issues. Thank you, sir.
To your point about the importance of having Americans, how will you advance American representation in the UN system at the same time that there are proposals that would dramatically cut back our contributions to the system?
So thank you for the question. In his first term, President Trump established the directive that we were to have an agency at I.O. at the State Department to focus on either elections where United States citizens could run and or be appointed to certain agency heads. That office, any of us involved in politics would love to have a record that office has achieved over the last 5 years. If memory serves, it's something like 28 contested positions and 23 or 24 successful candidates. It's a fantastic record. Credit to the president, to President Trump for his leadership on that issue. In his second term, and again, I'm a citizen. I'm not currently at post or in the State Department, but if confirmed, one of the things in my briefings that I really perked up at and thought was this a huge opportunity is the terrific team at State, at I.O. that's working on these issues.
I would agree it's been a sustained success across several administrations to keep advancing Americans for positions of leadership. One sitting to your right is nominated to lead an important food-related agency. The previous head, a Chinese national, was an alarming example of what happens to a critical UN agency when we don't have either American or American-aligned leadership. Last question for you, and then I have one question, if I might, for Ms. Guilfoyle. I believe investing in peacekeeping is a core part of the UN mission. I agree with you. We should have zero tolerance for abuse. I worked with Chairman Corker now many years ago on investigations and transparency around peacekeeping. How will we sustain our peacekeeping engagement when the president's proposed budget zeroes out all U.S. contributions to peacekeeping, and the rescission that will be on the floor next week would claw back $360 million? How do we balance that? How do we sustain an effective voice in peacekeeping while there's proposals to withdraw all support?
Senator, thank you for the question. As a citizen, I've not currently read into any of the issues relating to the reorganization or how that's approaching. I can say generally, though, if confirmed, I look forward to immediately getting stuck into those issues, to learn about those issues, and to working with this committee. I think on the broader point about peacekeeping operations and the successful ones versus the unsuccessful ones, having clear objectives and a clear exit strategy is an outstanding roadmap for any of these endeavors.
Broadly, we're in agreement on that point. I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Thank you, Senator.
Ms. Guilfoyle, if I might, just because the U.S.-Greece relationship is important to me, to my state, to our nation. Under the first Trump administration, there was a so-called 3+1 cooperation launched between the United States, Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. Give me your sense of what difference that's made, what's its current status, and whether you would commit to sustaining this level of cooperation in this structure.
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. I believe this is a very important area of concern as it relates to national security in Greece and Cyprus, Israel, all being very strategic and powerful allies, steadfast and reliable throughout the years, and this has just increased under President Trump's last administration. We're looking forward to making sure that those partnerships remain intact and, in fact, foster and develop. I believe firmly, if confirmed, as ambassador to Greece, that I will work tirelessly to make sure that Greece's national security interests and our strategic allies in that partnership remain very strong and robust, working in concert and conjunction with the United States of America, because national security in those areas and those countries directly equates with national security for the United States of America. And I would ensure that we increase the commitment that has been consistent by the people of Greece to do the defense spending, buying U.S. military equipment, which they have been doing, and see to it that we are going to project to include up to 5% from them.
Anything for me about why the 3+1 mechanism is particularly important?
Well, geopolitically, as you know, that is a very complex region with a lot of security issues, migration issues. We saw recently what's happened. And, you know, Greece, where it occupies its place in the world, is that southeastern edge of Europe, which is pivotal in terms of its relationship, its proximity to the Middle East. So we saw then with the cooperation with our allies, making sure that American citizens that were stranded and at great risk and danger in Israel were protected and were transported with ease and efficiency despite the complex issues involving visas. Our partners, our allies in Greece were able to help effectuate that in a timely and safe fashion, bringing people through Cyprus, through Greece, and into Athens. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Senator
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, and thank you to each of the panelists for coming here today and testifying on this important issue. It is particularly valuable that you're here to shed light on two issues important to our nation, to our families, and frankly also to my home state of Delaware, namely bankruptcy and data privacy. As I'm sure some of you know, Delaware is the most popular state in our nation for corporate incorporation, which also makes it a prominent bankruptcy jurisdiction. Delaware also is one of a small handful of states that's enacted robust data privacy protection laws, making it a potential model for federal legislation on data privacy, particularly in the context of bankruptcy. I do think it's critical that we strike the right balance between safeguarding data and personal information and maintaining a bankruptcy system that makes creditors whole and gives debtors a fresh start. If I might, Professor Gottberg, is a prospective buyer in bankruptcy legally required to follow 23andMe's current privacy policy?
So the privacy policy is a contract.
Right.
So contracts are enforceable as between the two parties. In law school, we like to teach that a contract is a promise to perform or to pay damages. So a company that undertakes a contract, if they don't perform, would open itself up to a lawsuit for damages. That's true for 23andMe, and it would be true for any subsequent buyer. Whatever the subsequent buyer agreed to do would just be a contract. There would be no enforcement mechanism to force them to comply. They could just choose to breach.
Nothing other than damages enforces that contract. And is there anything in the bankruptcy code that specifically addresses the transfer and use of highly sensitive personal data?
In that situation, that is where the consumer privacy ombudsman could be appointed.
Could be.
Right. But in that situation, their role is primarily to advise the bankruptcy judge to weigh the costs and benefits of any potential breach of a privacy policy. So again, without being able to put a number on what those damages are, what the cost is for a violation of privacy, it actually becomes a pretty difficult weighing exercise.
Is there any relevant precedent?
I don't know that it's ever been litigated. I haven't seen anything.
Me neither. Professor Cohen, Delaware and a few other states have enacted strong data privacy laws designed to regulate entities that control sensitive data, give individual consumers the right to access, correct, or delete certain data. How can my colleagues and I do something similar at the federal level, and specifically in the bankruptcy context, to ensure sensitive data doesn't end up in the hands of the wrong people or the wrong country as a result of a bankruptcy proceeding? And what's your view on the Don't Sell My Data Act, where I've joined Senators Grassley, Cornyn, and Klobuchar as a co-sponsor?
So I think the Don't Sell My Data Act is exactly the right idea here. I will say that I think that what's important is this idea of affirmative consent. That's what's central to the bill upon the transfer. And again, we still really haven't heard a good reason why we can't go back to all of these people and ask them, can you affirmatively consent to the transfer of your data to Regeneron or TTAM? So I'd love to see Congress push that and push it beyond bankruptcy to other kinds of sales of information as well.
Let me ask you a question about affirmative consent. Part of the market value of 23andMe is a service that is individually genetically identifying, that gives you information about, honestly, one of the most private things there could be, which is whether or not you're susceptible to certain diseases, what's your genetic ancestry, that sort of thing. Would it not stand to reason that although logistically challenging, going back to every individual who's given their personally identifying genetic information to 23andMe and affirming their consent would actually, in the end, build their market value by reinforcing that this kind of a service is something where people can count on it to protect their data privacy, regardless of whether there are damages available?
I think if you build your company on a reputation of trust and a reputation of autonomy and empowering people, this is exactly the thing you want to sell to customers, to say, we believe so much in what we say that we're even going to do this upon sale or bankruptcy.
I mean, I understand how it might be complex or expensive, but in the end, I think it ultimately serves the entire segment of personally identifying genetic consult because it builds trust. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for a chance to question witnesses.
Yeah. I'll take my turn now. I'm going to start with Mr. Savage. In 23andMe's March 20.
Terry, I look forward to working with you. You are, I believe, the first Secretary of Commerce to be a patent holder. And I personally am excited to work with you on protecting American innovation and patents. I have 4 different areas I want to touch on: AI chips, patents, the PTO, and IPEC, Manufacturing USA, and the MEP. Let me briefly, in one sentence, say I agree with comments made by members of both parties that the Manufacturing Extension Partnership is worth improving and saving, and I look forward to working with you on it. I've seen it in the field. I've seen the impact it can have. It could be modernized and focused, absolutely. But in my state, they delivered cyber tools to small manufacturers, and they've delivered state-of-the-art support. 1 down. 2, AI chips. What's your sense of the importance of AI to the 21st century? It's my sense that it's going to redefine our economy, our security, and our place in the world. And what's your sense of where U.S. advanced AI chip manufacturing stands relative to the Chinese right now?
So I agree with you that AI and the AI industrial revolution is our revolution in our lifetime. It is the industrial revolution of our lifetime. America has invented all of the great chips.
And how many chips will we make versus the PRC this year?
Currently, we're making 200,000 wafers, right? And we have demand of 10 million. Now, the chips deal that I made with TSMC, the Department of Commerce made, increase that, we'll have 1.2 million chips, wafers. 1.2 million wafers. So we'll be at about 12% of our demand.
And how
it's
much
woefully inefficient.
How much will the PRC make this year of advanced chips?
They say they're making them, and they are not. Okay, they do not have. We have restricted the tools to make the highest quality chips.
And I think, look, the FT reports that they're making fewer than 400,000 chips.
Yeah,
maybe
I think probably
less than that.
closer to 200,000.
So let's say it's 200,000 of the most advanced chips being made in the PRC, millions in the United States. Let's just agree that this is bipartisan, sustained over 2 administrations, and critical to our future, because we want the most advanced frontier AI compute to be in the United States, the most advanced models to be in the United States, and this to drive this century for the United States. So
I agree.
My concern is that the diffusion approach of the previous administration, the AI diffusion rule, that mandated more than half of AI compute be located in America, has been set aside without, to my knowledge, a clear replacement. And I'm concerned about the deal with the UAE and what it means if we provide to the UAE a significant quantity of chips without a clear path for a greater amount of compute to be here in the United States. Could you just tell me how you see this new deal? I'm concerned that we are at risk of dependence on Middle East compute rather than U.S. compute, given some of our real challenges. And I don't agree with the argument that's been made by others, not by you, that if we don't provide these chips to the UAE, the Chinese will. How do you view that point?
So number one, I agree, and the administration agrees that compute, more than 50% of compute must be on our shores in America. So we completely agree. The deal with the UAE said if you buy a significant number of chips, you will invest in America and build data centers in America for an equal amount of chips. So that investment must be dual there and here. That's required. The AI diffusion rule was very confusing in that, for example, the Prime Minister of Poland hunted me down and said, what did I ever do to you that you have me as a tier 3? And, you know, I'm part of Europe. What are you doing? And it was illogical. It was hastily rushed through at the very end of the Biden administration. Our view is we are going to allow our allies to buy AI chips provided they're run by an approved American data center operator, and the cloud that touches that data center is an approved American operator. So we control it while it's over there.
Given the shortness of time, thank you. I look forward to working with you on this. I think it is absolutely critical. You spoke with another senator, Senator Shaheen, about the urgency of retaining steel and aluminum for our defense. AI compute is going to be absolutely central to our defense.
Absolutely.
You made a comment earlier, we want to make pharmaceuticals here, in response to, I think it was Senator Kennedy. You're familiar with Manufacturing USA?
Yes.
One of the things I was pleased to see was that it retained level funding.
Yes.
There are institutes around the country. There happens to be one in Delaware. Are you familiar with it? It's the National Institute for Innovation in Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals.
Yes, it is.
And it is 2-to-1 private sector match for government investment, and is on the verge of demonstrating a new way of manufacturing at scale pharmaceuticals in the United States.
Right.
It is critical to our being competitive. I'd love to talk to you about that in more detail. My last point quickly, I agree that there are too many unexamined patent applications. PTO fee diversion in the past has robbed the Patent and Trademark Office of critically needed resources to hire more and better examiners, to reduce the backlog, and to improve that speed. I have a bipartisan bill with Senator Tillis that would permanently prevent fee diversion, which increases the backlog. Would you work with me to support that?
I'll be glad to work with you. I think the Patent Office is one of the least understood and most incredible value for the United States of America. I think we undercharge. The fact that we have our amazing judicial system, that you can have access to it for $2,000. $2,000. And the U.S. judicial system should just do whatever you want. Seems extraordinary. Now, we want the price to be low so that the inventor can come in. But over time, I think we should have more money, and I think that's something that we're going to talk about. So I want to make sure we capture the benefit as well as the cost that's coming from the Patent Office.
There is a long-standing but underutilized capacity, the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator, that is meant to corral IP enforcement across the administration. I'd also like to talk to you about why I think that should be funded and why we need some function like that, no matter how configured.
I look forward to talking to you about
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ranking Member, thank you, Secretary Rubio. Look forward to 2 sessions together today. This afternoon, you'll be in front of the Appropriations Subcommittee. And I think there's going to be some themes across both of these. First, I think we all agree that China poses our single greatest geopolitical threat and that we have no choice but to deter China across the board and to outcompete China. Senator Ricketts and I just traveled to the Philippines and Taiwan and saw directly the challenges that we face there and regionally. And you've recently had some significant successes, the DRC, Rwanda, peace transition, the avoidance of escalation in India and Pakistan, the opening towards Syria. But I also frankly think that there's been a real lack of coordination and some serious harm to our standing in the world with some of the countries that we have worked most closely with over decades. The DOGE-driven, abrupt, and largely illegal cancellation of billions of dollars of contracts for humanitarian relief and aid, and the disrespect and the dismissal of thousands of AID staff and our NGO partners stands in sharp contrast to the state reorganization process you just presented on in your following. You've submitted plans and proposals. We're having a conversation. You're going to send a congressional notification. We're going to have a hearing. That's the way that the reforming of USAID could have and should have happened. And so I just at the outset had to say, as someone who spent 15 years traveling the world, visiting both our partners and allies, looking at independent or semi-independent agencies like the MCC and the DFC and their role, and visiting NGO partners and the USAID, I reject the broad characterization of them by Elon Musk and DOGE as criminals who were wasting taxpayer money. You've heard across all of us support for PEPFAR, concern about humanitarian relief, and the vision that this is a key strategic asset for us. It's my hope that we'll work together to actually make real a more effective, focused, and sustainable foreign aid component to what STAID does, and sustaining organizations that we help build together, like the MCC, the DFC, and the Global Fragility Act. So let me turn to this for a moment. My colleague, Senator Shaheen, made reference to places in the world where the CCP and the PRC have stepped forward. I agree, they're never going to deliver humanitarian aid the way we used to, and with the breadth, depth, and effectiveness that we have. But I also think they're taking advantage of the opening to say that we're not reliable, that our decades-long partnerships can't be sustained and extended, and to question our motivations. So I think we need to step out quickly to avoid creating a big hole in our credibility globally. Let me just start on a few questions with Ukraine. The previous administration worked closely with our partners and allies in Europe on sanctions to tighten them, to close loopholes, to extend designations. Are you continuing to do that?
Work with our allies?
To tighten the
Yeah,
sanctions?
so, well, first of all, the Europeans have their own set of sanctions, and we've coordinated with them very closely. In fact, the president had a call with at least 6 leaders from Europe yesterday. I had meetings with what we call the Quint, that include Italy, France, the UK, the Germans, the French. So we are in constant contact with them on the work that they're doing. And they're proceeding along their own route. And in fact, in our conversations in the past with the Russians, we made clear to them that the Europeans and ultimately will have to be at the table because they have their own set of sanctions that they're imposing. So the answer to your question is we have worked very closely with them. The president understands fully the options he has available to him, some of which are represented in the bill before the Senate.
In the bill before the Senate that Senator Graham and others have led and that I co-sponsor, I think we have an opportunity to put more pressure on Russia and to push Putin to get to the table and to agree to a just and enduring peace. Do you support that sanctions bill? And do you think we should continue to arm Ukraine and to strengthen the sanctions against Ukraine in order to create the conditions for a real negotiation?
Yeah, look, it may come to that point. If, in fact, it is clear that the Russians are not interested in a peace deal and they just want to keep fighting a war, it may very well come to that point. The president has made that in the past. Our belief, the president's belief, is he believes that right now, if you start threatening sanctions, the Russians will stop talking. And there's value in us being able to talk to them and drive them to get to the table. We'll see. Look, they have to do this. No one's claiming that this is a guarantee.
President Zelensky reversed himself, showed up, was ready and willing to negotiate. And Putin, I think, my view, continues to play for time.
Well, so
I hope that we can work together to put more pressure on Putin to get to the table and to resolve this. The other thing that I see clearly, and I think many of my colleagues do, is that what happens in Ukraine sets the table for what happens in the Indo-Pacific. That there's an increasing coordination between the Russians, the Iranians, the DPRK, and the PRC. Do you see that as well, Mr. Secretary?
Well, we remind our European allies every day that were it not for China, Russia would not be able to sustain this. And they're fully aware of that. And obviously, we all understand the presence of the North Koreans and the Iranian role in this as well. But by the same token, I would say there's a flip side to that, and that is every minute we spend, every dollar we spend on this conflict in Europe is distracting both our focus and our resources away from a potential for a much more serious, a much more cataclysmic confrontation in the Indo-Pacific. So the answer is yes, they are related, but they're related both ways. They're related on the one hand by the precedent that it could set, but they're also related by the fact that every minute that we spend on this conflict that cannot be won by military means, every resource that's expended into it is money and time that's not being spent on preventing a much more serious confrontation from a global perspective in the Indo-Pacific.
You made the point earlier that, in your view, we did not coordinate well enough between countries where we for decades had done humanitarian aid, disaster relief, public health work, and countries that ally with China in terms of resource mining and processing. One of the countries we visited was the Philippines. The Philippines is the most disaster-prone country on Earth. They have more typhoons, volcanoes, earthquakes than anywhere else, and they are a treaty ally of the United States. Yet we abruptly canceled a whole series of programs that provided disaster assistance, development assistance, and humanitarian aid. My hope is that we will work together to follow an appropriate and legal process to reform foreign aid and to align it with our values and priorities. I've long seen the MCC and the DFC as critical components in pushing back on what you correctly perceive as the PRC's extractive engagement with much of their region. What do you see as the future for organizations like the MCC and the DFC? And when we next speak this afternoon, I'll be pressing you on the America First Opportunity Fund and understanding how this nearly $3 billion Agile fund will fit into the picture for the future of aid.
Yeah, on DFC, we don't control those two entities. They're independent. They're both undergoing a review. DFC, I think, has the opportunity to potentially even expand. That's not a commitment, but I'm telling you there's talk about that. On Millennium Challenge, I think that I saw some reporting out there that it was being imploded. My understanding is the way it's being approached is that it's being reformed but not done away with. It was actually created as an alternative to the way we did aid with USAID. And so there's work happening on both of them. So my personal view on DFC is I think DFC has an opportunity to perhaps do more, and it's the sort of investment we want to make around the world and the way it's structured. And on Millennium Challenge, it's undergoing a review right now, but the review is designed to improve it, not to eliminate it.
Well, we should talk more directly about that. I'm concerned that what's happened in other agencies is happening there. The overwhelming majority of the headquarters staff being suspended or fired, and then compacts eliminated more quickly than it's being reformed. Same thing with global communications through USAGM, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia. I'm concerned that we are conceding spaces to the PRC when we should be working together on a shared objective.
Senator Coons.
Thank you very much, Chair and Ranking, and thank you, Director Patel. I appreciate your being here today. I'm the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus in the Senate with Senator Cornyn, and as someone who had responsibility for the second largest law enforcement in my admittedly small state for the decade before I came here, I got to see the importance of the FBI as a training resource, as a critical technical and law enforcement partner for state and local law enforcement in my state. Just this past year, in November, the FBI and Delaware law enforcement successfully investigated and arrested an individual who was leading a human trafficking ring. Just a reminder of how federal, state, local partnership can make a huge difference. We're here at the Appropriations Committee. As best I understand where we are, you have not submitted an appropriations request. What we've got from the administration is a so-called skinny budget, just a few sentences. And it asks for $545 million in cuts to the FBI. I believe you testified yesterday to House Appropriations that you would request $11.1 billion. The administration's request is $10.1 billion. I'm familiar with the dynamics of differences between what agencies could productively use and what administrations request. But I'll be blunt, I'm concerned about the trajectory the administration has taken on funding law enforcement. DOGE cut through the Office of Justice Programs at DOJ 365 grants totaling more than $800 million. And they were not all DEI or climate change or things that didn't support the president's agenda. They cut grants that aided victims of crime, violent crime investigators programs, programs combating child abuse. I am not in any way suggesting that you were responsible for that. I'm just saying there seems to me to be a tension between those of us who want to robustly support federal law enforcement and the absence of any request from you here today. Will you return to this committee for us to have an appropriations hearing once there is actually a budget request from the FBI?
I will speak to, this being my first go-around, Senator, I'll speak to the Department of Justice and circle back with you on that.
Please, because bluntly at your confirmation hearing, you answered questions from Senator Padilla, Senator Britt about the urgency of retaining your workforce, investing in training. I believe you testified yesterday that if the budget request submitted by the administration was enacted, you'd have to lay off 1,300 agents. Is that accurate?
There's a little more nuance to it than that. The folks that have taken what we call the fork in the road initiatives have filled that number in terms of how many would have to be quote unquote laid off. And then there's the
leave federal service, which is an important reduction in the force that you have available to you to fight crime.
Right. But those folks have already entered that program or are in it now.
I look forward to getting an actual appropriations request from the administration and to going over it with you. Let me just renew one other specific question. Eligibility for the FERS annuity supplement. FERS is the Federal Employees Retirement System. If in fact the reconciliation bill that the House Oversight Committee is considering removes eligibility, this would deprive thousands of agents of tens of thousands of dollars a year in earned benefits and would have a real impact on early retirement and on recruitment and retention. What are you doing about this threat to the FERS retirement benefit eligibility?
Senator, one of your colleagues asked me a similar question, and I will get back to you on that, specifics of what's happening with FERS.
One of my top priorities, as we discussed before, is preventing IP theft, particularly from the CCP. They've been particularly aggressive at stealing America's inventions and innovations. I was pleased to see you reference this in your testimony. What's the FBI doing to address threats to American inventions and innovation? And would an increase in funding allow increased efforts in this area?
Taking that in reverse order, with more money, we can do more, Senator, put simply. But when it comes to all things CCP, it is, if not the #1 priority every day, it's almost the #1 priority every day, especially when it comes to what they're stealing from us, both on the IP side and the agricultural side. So we have rededicated more FBI personnel to investigate how they are doing that. And I'm also working with both the private and public sector engagements, because we don't at the FBI possess the capabilities alone to suss out what they're doing and how they're doing and blocking it. So
that's something I think is a critical and important initiative for you and for your agency. We also talked about FISA reform. In April of last year, the Senate reauthorized FISA Section 702 for 2 additional years and codified some of the FBI's internal reforms. And those reforms were a big reason why, for the first time ever, I voted in reauthorization of Section 702, about which I've had some real concerns. Can you give us some update on the FBI's implementation of these reforms and tell us what changes to Section 02 you might anticipate requesting when it comes up for reauthorization next year?
I can tell you that we have been, as a former terrorism prosecutor and a member of the IC who has used 702 successfully, and as a former public defender who has stood up for violations of civil rights and constitutional violations, it's a delicate balance for me. I am for the renewal of Section 702 with the modifications that have already been made, and have some ideas about how to make it better going forward. And in terms of how we've ingested the changes to 702 that were put in before I got here, I look back at the statistics, and I'll get them to you, the concrete ones. But I think prior to the changes made, there was hundreds of misuses of 702 internally, and now we have found one, which we believe was an actual mistake. So I think we're trending in the right direction. And I understand the concerns about, 702 queries against U.S. citizens. I also understand the challenge when it comes to search warrants versus lifetime action, and that's something we're just going to have to work with you on.
Well, this is an important balance I look forward to hearing from you about and working with you on. You've also testified just yesterday in front of House Appropriations that you are orienting the FBI looking forward. There won't be any actions against FBI agents based on what they did in terms of carrying out assignments to investigate January 6 incidents. During your confirmation, you said there will be no retribution taken by the FBI should you be confirmed as director. James Dennehy, who was head of the New York field office, has been forced out, received no reason for his removal, but had resisted efforts to turn over a list of agents involved in January 6 investigations. That's how I've understood the characterization of his separation. And that sounds to me like politicization and retribution for involvement in January 6th. I just want to hear your statement about where you see any disciplinary actions related to January 6th investigations.
Thank you, Senator. With the ongoing litigation related to the specific list, there's only so much I can talk about, but I can tell you this with affirmation. No one on any list will be punished at the FBI. As someone who was given case assignments I didn't want many times over, you don't get punished for your case assignments. You only get punished if you didn't do the job and fail to follow the ethical guidelines and break the law, and that's the standard.
The Judiciary Committee recently had two career prosecutors in front of them who were dismissed explicitly for their involvement in prosecuting January 6 cases. I understand that's not the FBI. I hope to work with you on ensuring that we orient the FBI forward. In February, I did join all my judiciary colleagues to send then acting Director Driscoll letters about proposed purges of agents for simply carrying out their assignments. Do you know if you've answered that letter?
I'll have to check, Senator, sorry.
I'll tell you that I haven't received a response, and I expect a response. More importantly, I expect a budget and appropriations request so we can do our job as the relevant appropriations subcommittee. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Coons, Thank you, ma'am.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chair Hyde-Smith and Ranking Member Gillibrand, Secretary Turner. Welcome. Thank you for the chance to be with you today. I appreciated receiving, finally, your budget submission, and I look forward to getting to know you better and to work with you. I'll just mention right at the outset, Madam Chair, that my week had a positive start because I got to visit a project built by a faith-based organization from the Mennonite community to address youth aging out of foster care in a rural community known as Greenwood, Delaware. And I'm pleased, as are you, that the youth aging out of foster care program will be sustained. But I'm gravely concerned that several of the tools that were used to make that project work are not being continued. I was a county executive. I spent 6 years of my life working on housing. We were responsible for the second largest housing authority in my state. The housing authority didn't own any units. It was all private sector, private landlords, but working in partnership with us and with HUD. And I'm working on a bipartisan piece of legislation with Senator Kramer of North Dakota called the Choice in Affordable Housing Act. And it would make housing choice vouchers more accessible. It would do a better job of attracting and retaining private sector landlords to the program. It's got a wide range of groups involved in housing production, housing advocacy, supporting it. And I'd like you to commit to working with me on that legislation to see if we can make progress on improving the Housing Choice Vouchers program. Is that something you'd be willing to work with me on?
Thank you, Senator. It's great to see you, sir. And I do look forward to seeing the language and hearing from you and your staff and how we can work together. Obviously, the housing affordability is a top priority of mine and taking care of American people and also people, to see people live lives with self-sustainability. And for the youth aging out of foster care, you know, I'm looking forward to working with this committee and also with the First Lady as we take care of our youth to make sure that they land on solid ground in the days ahead.
Well, you heard from Senator Gillibrand, and I'll repeat the same thing, a passion on my part for working on the conversion of formerly commercial buildings to residential buildings. I'm close with a developer in Delaware that's done that a number of times successfully. As Senator Gillibrand knows, it's very difficult to do. Some properties lend themselves to it easily. Some properties are almost impossible. We have a significant challenge nationally. We are not producing enough affordable housing. We're not producing enough housing in urban centers. We're not producing enough housing in rural areas. And taking underutilized or vacant commercial properties and appropriately transitioning them to housing for those who are either homeless, unhoused, or underhoused is another thing I'd love to work with you on. But I must say, just right off the top, that I looked at this budget You are a person of faith, as are the rest of us on this panel. You share a commitment to caring for our vulnerable neighbors, the least of these. But this budget, Mr. Secretary, is not a serious proposal. It does not meet the urgent housing needs of our country. A 50% cut to all the programs at HUD would be devastating to families and goes well beyond right-sizing a bloated agency, which was your phraseology. I think it takes a chainsaw to programs that I've worked with for years and that I've seen help the neediest Americans. As county executive, I relied on the home program. I've worked closely with the SHOP Sweat Equity program. I've supported and worked closely with the Continuum of Care program, whether it's HOPWA or housing for the elderly or housing for persons with disabilities. The solution to eliminating all of these services and then rolling them up into a new block grant program, I will assert, Mr. Secretary, will simply shift the burden onto states and counties. States and counties will end up being forced to pick up services for people who will become newly unhoused. That may not be your intention, but it is certainly my intention to test and push and challenge some of the assumptions underlying this. The administration is shifting the burden onto states and counties for a lot of other programming, for food assistance, healthcare, education, and that will badly strain state and county budgets to also move housing affordability for seniors, for the disabled, for families with children. I think goes beyond streamlining HUD services, but leads to fewer people receiving services. Let me just talk a little bit more about CDBG and home. As county executive, home was absolutely critical to our working in partnership with local nonprofits, several of them faith-based. It required a non-federal match, a robust non-federal match. It allowed us to build affordable housing, especially for disabled folks in our county. It helped 44,500 individuals a year. Do you actually believe state and local governments have the ability to pick up the costs for services that will be shifted to them if all of these programs are eliminated?
Thank you, Senator. And I appreciate your perspective on everything, and thank you to your service, both locally and here nationally. Senator, HUD has record funding, and currently we're only able to serve 1 out of 4 eligible families with $77 billion. Mm-hmm. And I alluded to this before, and I will say again, we have to do something different, because what we have been doing over these many years has not been working. Stewardship has to be a priority. There's a lot of waste, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of abuse in our system. And we can't, when I alluded to saying, you can't keep running the same plays, what I mean, there's the best teams that I've seen in my career are the teams that make adjustments. We can't keep running the same play because it's causing us to lose. Well, that's what I feel like in America today, in particular with HUD. We've been running plays that have caused us to lose. And so, sir, this is a different way of looking at things. It's a rethinking of how can we get states to have skin in the game. I do realize, I understand the responsibility that you speak of, but this is a way for states to identify their unique needs and then to distribute their funds as they see fit. They can identify those that have been successful and fund those. And so it's a way for the states to uniquely get involved, to be very deliberate and decisive of their stewardship. And so, sir, that's the paradigm that I'm talking about. That's the culture shift I'm talking about. It's a new way of looking at it, a new way of rethinking it. The home program, to be honest, over the last 33 years has built 1.3 million units. That's only 32 units a year. And it provides gap funding, but the other funding has been $185 billion. So I think we have to look at this in a different way and do it better.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes,
with all due respect, I welcome and appreciate some fresh thinking or a new look, a new attitude, but cutting funding by 50%, cutting the HUD workforce by 1/3 is not going to produce any significant increase in housing production. You can reorganize, you can right-size, you can reanalyze existing programs. I would reject the assertion that the home program, as administered in my county, was rife with waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm not going to defend every home program in every county in America because I can't, but I know the ones I was responsible for. I met with the Delaware home builders earlier today. Many of the folks in the room I've known for decades. One of them is among the leading builders of quality, affordable multifamily housing in America. and they probably don't want me to quote them right now. But their comment was the staffing cuts that you've pushed through this agency, reducing by a third the total headcount, means that getting projects approved that have to have an approval, a sign-off on a mortgage or a sign-off on a project approval, their wait times have gone from months to projects not moving forward, falling apart. And they cited to me the potentially disastrous consequences for low-income housing tax credit projects, for home projects, for Section 232 and 202 projects, of having all the staff with experience and expertise managing these gone, and then all the funding shoved into one big pile and sort of pushed at the states to say, you come up with your priorities. In the room full of folks I just met with who have decades of experience building housing of all kinds, high-end, mid, low, multifamily, single-family, inner-city, rural. These are guys who represent the whole scope of the home building industry in my state. They were not optimistic that working together, we were going to generate more housing. And I'll say one last point on one comment, if I might. Senator from Rhode Island, senator from Hawaii, senator from Delaware. The idea that we're going to solve this problem by accessing federal lands, that doesn't build you one single unit of housing in my state. East Coast, there's not a whole lot of relevant vacant federal land. Right. And I dare say, although these are not my states or my geography, in states like, Wyoming or Montana or Utah, my hunch is the infrastructure cost to connect out to and build on available vacant federal land may not pencil out. Let me conclude. I'm way over, and I apologize, Madam Chair, but I was the last, so I figured I'd take a little moment. Thank you for what you've said today about the values you bring to this work and about working together to find the right balance. And thank you for your willingness to take on a challenging department at an important time. But bluntly, Mr. Secretary, I think we need to produce more housing, not less. And I look forward to working with you to try to find ways to do that in keeping with our charge of stewardship. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Without objection, this letter from the First Lady Melania.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin. Congratulations to your families and to you for your nominations. Thank you for your service. Mr. Squires, I'll turn to you first, and I have a series of fairly quick questions about patent policy. I am encouraged that you're willing to serve at this pivotal moment in global IP policy and appreciate your taking the time to meet with me. Earlier this month, Senators Tillis, Durbin, Hirono, and I reintroduced the Prevail Act. It includes common sense reforms to the Patent Trial and Appeal Board and will help make it more the fair and efficient form I believe Congress intended in the American Invents Act. Do you think the PTAB needs to be reformed? If so, in what ways? And do you think Prevail could contribute to those reforms?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for your question, and thank you also for the opportunity to meet in your office. I do think there is need of reform. I think we have almost 15 years of data since the American Invents Act to see the distribution, if you will, between post-grant review and IPRs, and the data seems to be skewed in favor of one versus the other, so reform may help flatten out that curve.
There's a significant pendency problem, about 800,000 unexamined patent applications. Dealing with that will require streamlining and improving the workforce of the PTO. Reducing this backlog will require resources. One of the provisions of the Prevail Act would permanently end the practice of fee diversion. The PTO is entirely fee-funded by the substantial fees paid by those who seek patents. Would you oppose fee diversion at the PTO?
Thank you, Senator. We have a Commerce Secretary also who is very savvy with patents and has lived the patent life in private sector. Fee diversion, I had testified to years ago, almost 18 years ago, should end. The Patent Office should be able to keep its fees and run its system like a business. I think the fee diversion ending would be a positive thing for the Patent Office.
In eBay, the Supreme Court dramatically cut back on the availability of injunctive relief after finding a patent infringement. My Restore Act with Senator Cotton would return patent law to what was literally centuries of tradition by restoring a rebuttable presumption that a patent owner can get an injunction. What is injunctive relief? What does it mean to small inventors, and why is it significant?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Injunctive relief is basically a cease and desist order for operations, sales, manufacturing, any commercialization of a product. It's important to individual inventors because they're coming to the office with their issued patents to get an exclusive right. Right to exclude is a property right, and property right enforcement usually involves kicking out the trespassers. So that's why the individual vendors look to that provision. It also gives them the right, exclusive right, as conferred by the monopoly granted by the government, to practice not the right to do anything themselves, but to exclude others. That's what the patent grant means.
In the Section 101 area, the jurisprudence about what is patentable, I think, in fact, the Federal Circuit thinks that the Supreme Court's jurisprudence has ended up getting into a box canyon that's hard to get out of. What's the impact been of critical decisions like Myriad and Alice on cutting-edge technologies like AI and blockchain?
It's created uncertainty throughout the entire process. When a patent's granted, even if they're overcome in the office, those particular eligibility objections, they're litigated and not respected rights once they're in the marketplace, and they're often, vehicles for litigation outside of the merits of infringement, whether the claims read on an accused product.
And has this hurt our competitiveness globally in terms of where cutting-edge technology patents are being filed and advanced?
Thank you, Senator. I believe it has. And as I mentioned in my response to Senator Tillis, we've seen other nations have success with more expansive subject matter. We shouldn't be so constrained.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers across a range of patent issues. Mr. Edlow, if I might, between 2020 and 2021, over 80,000 employment-based green cards for legal employment here in the United States went to waste because the then USCIS leadership didn't adjudicate them, resolve them on time, and that sparked bipartisan concern. Do you agree that wasting green cards that have been authorized by Congress is unfortunate, and these opportunities for legal employment shouldn't be missed? And as director, will you prioritize reducing unnecessary paperwork and improving processes to improve legal employment here in this country?
Senator, thank you so much for the question. You know, in the last 4 years, I've had the privilege of serving in the private sector, and I've seen the need to modernize forms in a way that I never really understood before. If confirmed, I plan on making major gains to modernize our systems, both for vetting and screening purposes, but also to allow attorneys to better send in forms as opposed to still using paper forms, to be able to scan them and then that information be taken in through a PDF process. So absolutely.
Thank you. Last question, if I might, Mr. Chairman. I've been gravely concerned about recent decisions to abruptly end TPS provisions for folks who came to this country under these legal programs from Haiti, from Venezuela, in particular from Afghanistan, and that are leading to hundreds of thousands of people losing their current legal work authorizations at the same time. Businesses in my state and around the country are facing significant labor shortages, and families that are here legally, working legally, are facing return to countries that are not demonstrably any more stable than they were when they left. As director, would you work to prioritize getting those who are eligible for other pathways to remain here and to work here legally the opportunity to do that, to limit the damage to their lives and to their community?
Well, Senator, let me start with commending the work of the administration right now in terms of following the law with how TPS is supposed to be. The Secretary is required to make determinations at certain intervals, and if the conditions that led to the initial TPS decision are no longer met, then they need to be terminated. Regardless of that, when someone's here with TPS or another temporary pathway, those are temporary pathways. And if they have...
I'm familiar with the process, sir, and I'm also familiar with the ongoing circumstances in both Haiti and in Afghanistan, and disagree with the determination that we should force back to Afghanistan anyone who came here legally.
Mr. Chairman, if I may...
Senator Brett.
Yes, why don't you go ahead, Mr. Edlow, and respond.
Literally. Time has expired. Senator Coons, you're recognized.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn, and thank you to the committee for holding this oversight hearing. And Attorney General Bondi, thank you for your service and for being with us. I want to start with an area where I think we have a lot to agree on. In May, your Bureau of Prisons issued a directive to expand the availability of home confinement. The directive said it was rooted in the principle of smart, fair criminal justice reform. and explained that smart reform and public safety can go hand in hand, and that second chances are not just possible, they're necessary for a justice system worthy of the American people. There's more to do to implement this directive, but I appreciated the BOP's recognition of these principles. Could you briefly speak further about the work BOP Director Marshall and Deputy Director Smith, himself a former inmate, are doing with regard to reform, and what opportunities you see for us to do more?
Thank you, Senator Coons. And you have been a champion of that, and we believe in second chances. As a career prosecutor, I know that most people, even violent criminals, are going to be locked up and then they're going to be released. And that's why we need everyone to be a productive member of society. I believe in halfway houses, and that's part of what the First Step Act did. It gives people a second chance at life, and that's what Billy Marshall and Josh Smith have been doing, working hand in hand at the Bureau of Prisons. I talk to them constantly, and they are working so hard. In fact, they inherited a dysfunctional and neglected agency, and they are taking, despite more than $450 million being appropriated between 2019 and 2024, we found that funds had been diverted away from the Department of the Prisons, the Bureau of Prisons. And so they are doing everything to create more halfway houses and to give inmates everything they need to be successful upon release, but also by keeping America safe. And I just learned from Billy Marshall, we just made an incredible case that someone, I believe the case was in Texas, one of our federal prisons, no one was monitoring this. And there was someone who was caught with a drone dropping off recently cell phones,
Yep.
paraphernalia,
Let me follow up on that point, if I might, Attorney
many
General.
things that could cause violence within our prisons and allow criminal cartel networks to function within our federal prisons. And that's what a lot of this money is going for, to make our prisons safe within and so these criminals cannot function while they are in prison. But one good thing I can also add is we have given inmates, I think we've over doubled the amount of minutes they can have on their phones so they can talk to their family members, because we believe that is important.
One of the challenges federal probation officers face is massive caseloads. And I am about to introduce, hopefully reintroduce soon, a bill with Senator Lee that would improve our federal supervised release system by focusing resources on those who really need to be supervised and providing incentives to reduce oversight of those who've really made progress and who've changed the direction of their lives. It is broadly supported by law enforcement and a variety of policy groups, and I'd love to work with you on that, Madam Attorney General.
Yeah, Senator, can I just add, because I just got the numbers. So what we have is $8.7 billion for the Bureau of Prisons, and what that does is it adds 587 correctional officers to help with the things that we just discussed. $95 million for new hires. We have to recruit and we have to retain. We know that's a really tough job to be a corrections officer, and that's why Josh Smith is such a valuable part of that team with Billy Marshall. And I would welcome working with you on that. And President Trump is the one who signed the First Step Act because he believes in second chances. We all do. Thank you, Senator Coons, for that question.
One of the things I have been concerned, even upset about, is how early in this administration, at the behest of DOJ, the department cut hundreds of grants totaling hundreds of millions of dollars, many of which serve critical public safety needs, supporting victims, assisting with reentry, violence prevention, including in my own home state. This was literally defunding the police. And I have some concerns about how DOJ is putting at risk public safety by assigning thousands of agents and prosecutors away from drugs, firearms, corruption, violent crime to help ICE arrest people without criminal records. You've indicated a willingness to review any grant that a member of Congress has concerns about, and noted a number of them have been restored on appeal. And I appreciate that willingness to admit some misjudgments or mistakes in some of the many grants that were canceled. But can you assure us this process is going to be fixed going forward so better decisions are made at the start and not just after appeals? And can you assure us that we are not leaving doors wide open for crime and criminality in our communities and over-focusing on arrest and deportation of those without criminal records?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. And as I said earlier, we are reviewing all the grants, and I believe we have, turned some back on for senators who have called. It doesn't matter what state you're from. If it's a law enforcement grant, if it's protecting victims, let us know and we will work with you. And I'm not sure if we have done any in your state yet, but I would be happy to work with you on that. What I can tell you is there have been, out of the 5,800 discretionary grants that were reviewed, only 376 around the country, 7% were terminated. 225 of the grant recipients have appealed that termination. And so far, we've turned back on 18 of those. 17 appeals have been denied, and the rest are being actively reviewed. If any of you know of any of those that you believe should be turned back on, call me. We don't want to jeopardize anything that's hurting. Please do. And Senator, to go to what you said about the FBI and my federal agencies and being pulled to work on immigration cases, they're working hand in hand because we believe that, we have ICE officers out there, as we just discussed. I don't want to repeat that, who are being harmed. We're going to work with them, and I've directed all of my law enforcement agencies to work with ICE to make sure they're safe in Chicago, to make sure they're safe in Memphis, to make sure they're safe right here in Washington, D.C., but also at President Trump's direction. We are not stopping the core function of what we're doing, and that is fighting violent crime, and I think Director Patel made that very clear with all of the arrests that our FBI have been making on violent criminals. And there's so much that we can't talk about here, but if any of you are on the Intel Committee, we are fighting terrorists around this country every single day. Our lawyers are shut down right now. They're not getting paid, but crime is not stopping. They are working around the clock to not only keep our country safe, Senator, but to keep our world safe. And
Madam Attorney General, I think all of us hate that there's a shutdown and its impact on the federal workforce, and are working to find a way out of this shutdown, but one that will also restore cuts to health care. We could spend a lot of time on that, but let's focus on, if I could, two more questions related to your service as the Attorney General. The government's asserting the authority to summarily kill people. It says our cartel members through military strikes against boats on the open ocean in the Caribbean. Congress has never authorized such a use of military force, and it's unclear to me how the administration has concluded that these strikes are legal. I'm concerned with what the limiting principle is, whether the government could summarily kill people. It just declares our cartel members as well as unlawful combatants inside the United States, or if they were American citizens. This isn't about defending cartels, and these aren't hypothetical questions. President Trump assembled military leaders and said they would be needed to fight the enemy from within and to train in cities in the United States that he describes as chaotic and violent. Due process is the cornerstone of our Constitution. I'm deeply concerned about the authority our president seems to be asserting to summarily kill people suspected of criminal activity outside the law. As the chief lawyer for our federal government, you have a unique responsibility to ensure maintenance of our constitutional standards. How did you conclude that these strikes on ships or boats in the open ocean are legal?
Senator Coons, I'm not going to discuss any legal advice that my department may or may not have given or issued at the direction of the president on this matter. Regarding Venezuela, what I can tell you is Maduro is a narco-terrorist, and I announced $50 million reward for his capture to bring him to this country to face charges. He is currently under indictment in our country. Drugs coming from Venezuela are killing our children at record levels.
And members of this committee are as passionate as you at protecting our families and our communities from fentanyl, but we also need to protect our sailors on the high seas who are conducting freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea from just an abject violation of international norms and standards about how we interdict ships on the high seas. We can push back on fentanyl and drug trafficking. Many of my colleagues have done so as former U.S. attorneys or prosecutors or attorneys general, but we have to do it in a way that is in keeping with the core values of our Constitution. My colleagues have pressed you on a number of recent actions, particularly in the Eastern District of Virginia. My colleague, Senator Klobuchar, did. And I just wanted to add my voice to those who have expressed real alarm at how in your confirmation hearing you said you would be leading a department that would look forward, yet public statements by President Trump urging you to go after and to indict and to prosecute specific named people seem to have led to dramatic and sudden action by the department. I am gravely concerned about what is no longer a hypothetical question, which you refused to answer in your confirmation hearing, but is a real question about when or if the president demands you prosecute individuals because he views them as opponents or enemies, what you will do and what your limiting standard is, because the recent episode around the indictment of James Comey left me very concerned about the direction of the department.
We're a minute and a half over, Senator Chairman. May I answer?
Yes.
Senator Coons, as you have stated in the past, no one is above the law. And James Comey is a pending case right now. It's a pending indictment. He was indicted by one of the most liberal grand juries in the country, by our U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan, right here in Virginia. And it's a pending case, so I'm not going to discuss the facts of a pending case.
But you can understand the alarm about the circumstances of the indictment immediately following President Trump demanding that you take action to indict and prosecute that specific individual. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before Hawley, without objection,
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Congresswoman, for your willingness to continue serving. My welcome to your family, to Matt and to Sam, who I hope will get to enjoy some of this hearing in person. And I enjoyed our conversation and look forward to working with you. I'll just continue briefly on the conversation you were just having with Senator Ricketts. I think our global network of alliances and partnerships and our values are critical to our strength, stability, prosperity, our security, and we've got a global network of allies. China does not. They have nervous neighbors, they have client states, they use coercion, but they do not have genuine allies, as we do. And so they have made a concerted effort to use the UN system to advance their interests, both their different idea and standards for human rights. We believe in an individual right to liberty. They talk about collective rights. We have different standards. We want 6G to be built out on U.S. and Western-friendly standards. They want their standards. So I couldn't agree with you more that fighting for leadership of technical organizations. In the previous Trump administration, I worked closely with his PTO director to make sure that the World Intellectual Property Organization wasn't run by a PRC national, and the ITU, as we spoke about. So I think it's critical. We do have a strategy. I worked closely with Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield on this. As the chair of the appropriating subcommittee, Senator Graham and I worked well together with her to increase funding for junior professional officers, to increase funding for the U.S.-UN mission. If confirmed, will you commit to continuing this work to make sure that Americans and American-friendly leaders compete for and succeed at leading the technical organizations of the UN and compete for and succeed at staffing the junior levels of the UN?
Yes, thank you, Senator Coons, and I enjoyed our discussion. This is one of my top priorities, and this, you're seeing it came up in, as I mentioned, every single conversation. I think the success story of successfully having a candidate defeat China's candidate in the Intellectual Property Organization, that is a model that we need to continue to use in these other technical organizations. And that is, there is bipartisan support. As Tom Cotton mentioned in his opening statement, I was one of the founding members of the China Task Force, which of course led to the setting up of the Bipartisan China Select Committee. So there's bipartisan interest, and I also support your approach of strengthening and building on our strong alliances, whether it is AUKUS, whether it is building on the relationships within the Quad, whether it's ASEAN. We have an opportunity to build on those organizations, I think, as partnered within the UN system.
Chairman Risch referenced the sometimes frustrating dysfunction of the UN Security Council, the fact that both Russia and China have used it to block accountability measures. The General Assembly did pass an overwhelming resolution condemning Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, but we couldn't get it through the Security Council. The Security Council did, in September, unanimously pass, because of American leadership, a resolution continuing sanctions, visa bans, an arms embargo for Sudan. So it is not completely without merit. But one of the things the Biden administration advanced was UN Security Council reform to broaden its membership, as you referenced, to include the Global South and to try and move the Security Council more into a functional body. What are your views on what you should do to continue that agenda?
Certainly when it comes to UN Security Council reform, it is very complex. It is very challenging with both Russia and China and the veto on the P5. I would want to work with this committee and, of course, the president primarily on any proposals for UN Security Council reform. In my opening statement, when I was referencing reforms, I was mostly talking about ensuring that all of our taxpayer dollars are going to UN entities that function very well. But I am open to having conversations about how to make it work better. I think we need to have a broader strategy reaching out to countries within the Global South where China's made significant inroads. They've done it by building ports. They've done it through telecom. It's really been a whole of government approach. And it's obviously not the UN alone. It's working with Secretary Rubio. It's working with USAID, working with USTR, and significant economic investments that are happening in various
Don't forget the
other
DFC.
countries.
President Trump signed the BUILD Act into law in his first term. The Development Finance Corporation is a critical tool in our toolkit. Before I conclude, I just want to raise my profound concern about an executive order signed yesterday by President Trump that puts a 90-day pause on all development assistance without clarifying the scope of that. Does that include our contributions to UNICEF and the World Food Program, which I think you would recognize, you did recognize, led by Americans, broad bipartisan support, part of the key mission of the UN to promote stability and security by feeding hungry people and bringing stability. Does that include USAID's support to Ukraine's energy grid as Putin continues to hammer civilians through attacks on the energy grid? AID's support for getting energy back online in the midst of winter in Ukraine is pretty critical. Does it include Jordan? A sea of stability in a whole area of chaos. Will development assistance be frozen for 90 days to Ukraine, to our development partnership in the Philippines and the Luzon corridor to compete with China's influence in the region, to Jordan? I hope we can work together to get some clarity, and I hope where there are obvious partnerships that do advance American national interests, that they will move forward quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Coons.
Thank you, my colleague, Senator Cruz, and your military service to our nation. And Ms. Dillon, I appreciate your willingness to step forward and raise your hand to serve. You are all seeking critical leadership positions in a Department of Justice that is reeling and questioning the direction that it's being taken. Career prosecutors were fired for working on cases that President Trump did not approve of or like. Senior DOJ leaders in national security posts have been reassigned, and at the Southern District of New York and in the Public Integrity Unit, a half dozen prosecutors resigned earlier this month rather than carry out what they believe to be unlawful or unethical orders in the Eric Adams case. Ms. Dillon, if President Trump were to ask you to do something that you believed was either illegal or unconstitutional, what would you do?
Thank you for that question, Senator Coons. First of all, I have represented President Trump for 4 years in numerous different cases, and I currently represent him as a private attorney. And in all of those years, in multiple cases, in multiple jurisdictions, the president has never asked me to do anything that I found to be objectionable, immoral, unlawful, or illegal. And so I really can't fathom the circumstance that you're describing. It would really be hypothetical to me.
As I just conveyed, I don't think it's a hypothetical. You've got folks in the Public Integrity Unit and the Southern District resigning over what they believe to be an unethical and inappropriate order. And I put that exact question to your predecessor in the first Trump administration, Eric Dryband, his first AAG for civil rights. He didn't call it hypothetical. He answered directly. He said every Department of Justice attorney swears an oath to execute and faithfully execute and defend the Constitution and laws, and it would therefore be appropriate to refuse to follow a directive of the president if illegal or unconstitutional. Mr. Dryband, in exactly the same situation, answered the question. Is there any reason you can't?
Well, Mr. Dryban didn't have 4 years of representing President Trump as his lawyer, and so I would give him the grace of not knowing for that experience that I've had. And so I think that it is a hypothetical to me, and so I respectfully...
It may be to you, but sadly it is not to currently serving members of the Department of Justice. If I might, Mr. Reitz, in the exchange that was just held both between Senator Durbin and Senator Hawley and yourself, dozens of President Trump's executive orders have been blocked by federal courts in recent weeks, federal district courts, and a number have been reviewed on appeal. To your knowledge, has the administration complied with these federal court orders?
Thank you, Senator Coons. I have not been following the procedural posture of those cases very closely. Of course, I intend to do so should I be confirmed once I'm in the Justice Department.
You'll be centrally involved in those decisions, and part of what my colleague was trying to focus on was the tweet that you apparently posted in response to a decision you didn't like. The tweet said, looking for some Andrew Jackson level leadership on this one, Judge Yackel has made his decision, now let him enforce it. My colleague from Missouri suggested that somehow Senator Durbin was standing up for the Korematsu decision or standing up for the Dred Scott decision. And I think buried in what he said and in what my colleague said is clarity. What are the avenues appropriately available to a litigant, which can include the president or a department secretary? What are the avenues available to properly challenge a duly issued federal circuit or district court order? And is it ever proper to simply refuse to obey that order?
Thank you, Senator Coons. I'll answer your second question first, which is what I referenced earlier. There is no hard and fast rule in all instances in which a litigant must comply with all or some or various parts of a judicial decision. It is so fact, law, and case specific that one cannot speak generally.
In your view, do litigants before a federal court get to choose whether or not to obey a federal court order? They can appeal it, they can speak out against it, they can question it, but can they refuse? Could the President of the United States refuse, as a litigant before a federal court, refuse to follow that order, which was the key implication of your tweet?
So, generally speaking, Senator Coons, parties to a case are bound by a lawful court holding from that court. And as you rightly pointed out, Senator Coons, there are many different avenues to right a perceived wrong, appeals, rehearings, various motions, et cetera. You're familiar with them.
I hope you will be clear in your service, since I recognize I'm nearing the end of my time. Thank you for that answer. I think all of us are holding our breath to see whether or not President Trump and those who will be advising him correctly understand what is a foundational principle of the rule of law.
Thank you, Senator.
A litigant
Coons, for your
before a
brevity.
federal court may
Appreciate
appeal,
that.
may question, may challenge, but may not ignore a
Thank you, Senator
district court
Coons.
order.
We'll move to Senator Blackburn for her questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and congratulations to each of you. We are...
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our nominees and your families, your willingness to serve, and I look forward to our conversation today. Mr. Whitaker, I have an aunt and uncle who live in Iowa City. I'm familiar with Hawkeye football and your record there, and I appreciate your citing Ronald Reagan and his comments at the 35th NATO summit and your understanding of teamwork. And I think you would get uniform agreement from the members of this committee that our NATO partners all need to pull their weight. Are you familiar with the Article 5 provisions of the NATO treaty?
Yes, sir.
And when's it been invoked?
Only once in the history of NATO, and that was to support the United States of America after it was attacked on September 11th.
And our then 29 NATO allies pulled their weight, deployed, served, fought alongside us, died. And I would argue that after Russia's aggressive invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, they've continued to do the same. In fact, in total, they've delivered more support for Ukraine than we have. Support for refugees, support for their economy, and military support. If you're confirmed as you head over to NATO, I was encouraged to hear you say you view it as a strong and vital alliance and you look forward to strengthening it. would it strengthen our alliance for us to abandon Ukraine and the uniform view of our NATO allies that defending Ukraine against Russian aggression is in our collective national interest?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Senator. Obviously, the situation on the
Please
battlefield.
be brief if you could.
Yeah, the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine is brutal. It's another land war in Europe. You know, we have to end.
Does it serve our national interest to abandon Ukraine?
Well, what's in our national interest, obviously, is a broad question. We need.
Oh, Mr. Whitaker, I have 3 minutes, not time for broad questions. I'll simply assert, if I might, that from my view, and I think this is broadly shared on this committee, pulling in the same direction is what a team does. Showing up, suiting up, getting in the fight, and pulling in the same direction is what a team with clear-eyed leadership does. And whatever that was last Friday, I hope we can get back on track in a united approach with our vital allies instead of confusing them, dividing them, having a push for greater investment, interoperability, greater lethality of NATO as a united force would be a great mission for you. I am concerned that that is not the direction that recent conversations between President Zelensky and President Trump will lead us. Mr. Landau, Mr. Regas, if I might, I'm encouraged, Mr. Landau, that you come from a foreign service family, that you've served as an ambassador, that you respect and understand the critical role that our foreign service plays. And Mr. Regas, you spoke well about the skills that they develop over many, many years. I have visited our foreign service all over the world and am deeply impressed with their skills. And I've also visited USAID missions and programs and projects all over the world. And I will tell you, I am heartsick and angry at what I view as a chaotic, poorly executed chainsaw that's been taken to what are critical NGO partners and USAID work around the world. As my colleague Senator Shaheen said, we all expected there would be reform, that there would be a thorough and disciplined look at how to tighten and focus and align USAID's development work around the world. Instead, what we've seen in recent weeks has been chaotic. Thousands have been laid off. I have met over and over with NGO leaders who are saying that the whipsaw of stop work orders, waivers, and then the failure to turn the money back on across exactly those programs that were proclaimed as critical life-saving humanitarian programs has resulted in household name NGOs, Samaritan's Purse, Catholic Relief Services, Save the Children, CARE, laying off thousands, shutting down programs all over the world. If confirmed, will you commit to sharing with us the process you used to get to where this is, whether or not these waivers have ever been respected, and to work with us to make sure we do not abandon this critical tool of U.S. foreign policy in the face of Chinese aggression around the world?
Senator, this committee plays a very important role in helping fashion the foreign policy of the United States, of which these programs are a part. And so I certainly do commit to you, as I committed to the ranking member, to discussing. I would love to hear, A, what programs you all think are the most important and that you see have the most effect on, in terms of the constituents you know and the broader effect. And second, making sure, to the point you just raised, Senator, that the implementation is done appropriately. If there's a waiver granted, to make sure that that money is actually flowing again.
I have not heard of a single example of a waiver being granted and the funding being turned back on, which is utterly unsurprising, given that all the critical staff who facilitate payments and funding transfers have been laid off, furloughed, or sidelined. So we have literally just unilaterally disarmed one of the most vital tools in that work to deliver peace through strength in the face of Chinese aggression. I'm glad that Senator Risch recognized, as we all do, that China is expanding its influence in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. And we have confused our partners, we have encouraged our adversaries, and abandoning exactly those Americans who have spent decades overseas and then leaving that space, whether it's confronting human trafficking, working against terrorists, combating pandemics, or pushing back against Russia and China and their malign influence in the world. This was a horrible owned goal that I eagerly want to work with you to try and address, because frankly, tens of billions of dollars have been cut in the name of pursuing a few million of dollars here and there that, yes, we can all agree shouldn't have been spent the way they were spent. But if thousands have been laid off, programs in dozens and dozens of countries have been shut down, and we have abandoned a key tool of our success in the Cold War that presidents from Kennedy to Reagan recognized as critical tools in our toolbox, then we have made a profound error that is going to produce weakness through chaos, not peace through strength. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Coons. I think you're, just as Senator Shaheen indicated, the sooner we get these guys in place, the sooner we'll be able to rectify some of these things. So with that, I'm going to move to Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Shaheen. And thank you to the nominees for appearing before us at what is undoubtedly an incredibly consequential time. I have no doubt.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. Thank you, Chairman, for calling this hearing. I'm grateful we're continuing this committee's a long tradition of oversight, and in particularly today, oversight of the FBI. Director Patel, thank you for being here. There's a number of issues I hope that we can speak to. I want to start by reading something you said to me during your confirmation hearing under oath. I have no interest, no desire, and will not, if confirmed, go backwards. There will be no politicization at the FBI. Then you looked me in the eyes and said there will be no retribution actions taken by the FBI should I be confirmed as director. I told you that in your office. I tell you that again today. I'm concerned that that's not what's happened, that since you took over as director, you've cleaned house or forced out senior leaders across the Bureau, in particular targeting those that worked on investigations of President Trump. The former acting director has just sued you for firing him for political reasons. So did a leader in the D.C. field office. And the well-respected leader of the Salt Lake City office was pushed out last month, leaving that office shorthanded at a particularly difficult time. I'm worried that these actions compromise the Bureau's ability to keep Americans safe. Hundreds of agents have resigned. You are lowering application standards to fill vacancies. You've reassigned large numbers of agents to work on immigration and street crime, issues other law enforcement agencies can handle, perhaps more effectively with the FBI, but I'm concerned that this compromises the Bureau's ability to address national security risks, uniquely its capability. In fact, you've shut down the Office of Integrity and Compliance, which makes sure that agents act in a lawful and ethical way, and reassign staff away from domestic terrorism investigations exactly at a moment I think we are all concerned about it. I also have to ask, you came before the Appropriations Committee in May and told us you wanted a $500 million budget cut for the FBI, literally an effort to defund the police. I am grateful for the work of the men and women of the FBI. They've done great work this year in Delaware, partnering with the Dover Police Department to support human trafficking victims, partnering with the Middletown Police Department on armed robbery and carjacking. And it's urgent, I think, that we fix the direction and the prioritization within the FBI. And I wish we could focus on those efforts today. But I'm seeing an FBI leadership more focused on social media clout and on political revenge than on fighting crime. Director, have you ever ordered that an FBI employee be terminated because he or she worked on an investigation into President Trump?
Senator, thank you. One quick correction for the record. There's 280 NV investigations. I gave the incorrect number to Senator Hawley. Thank you.
Understood.
As far as a lot of your statement, I disagree with it, and I'm happy to address it. But the only way, generally speaking, an individual is terminated at the FBI is if they have violated their oath of office, violated the law, or failed to uphold the standards that we need them to have at the FBI.
So those who say that they've been fired because of working on investigations into President Trump are lying or misrepresenting?
Well, those matters are alleged in litigation, which is ongoing, so I can't comment on those specifically.
Could you comment on why you fired former acting FBI Director Driscoll?
I can't because it's ongoing litigation.
Could you say now definitively under oath that the rank and file agents who were assigned to work January 6 cases will not be terminated because that's what they were assigned to do?
I've said it before and I've said it again. Your case assignment, as I was given case assignments when I was a young prosecutor, does not dictate your career or your termination.
Thank you. Then let me go to the appropriations question. In May, you testified before the subcommittee on which I serve, defending the president's request that we slash the FBI's budget by about $500 million. The day before, you testified the opposite in front of the House. Where are we in terms of the budget request? Senator Graham earlier said if you're requesting more funding for more agents, let us know. We're nearing the end of the fiscal year. In front of the committee on which I serve here in the Senate, your request was for a reduction of hundreds of millions of dollars. Where are we?
Where we are in the budget cycle is we at the FBI are in support of the president's budget, and we are in support of eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. We've already identified tens of millions of dollars of duplicative contracts that the FBI was spending on software and private sector engagements. We've also identified duplicative workloads. So we are transitioning those folks out of doing the same thing twice over and into the field. And that's my focus right now. And the move of the FBI headquarters is also going to save the FBI $3.5 billion in the American taxpayers. So we're focused on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. And as I told Senator Graham, if I'll go back and talk to my team, and if we need more, we'll let you know.
Are you planning any additional reductions in force, Director?
No.
How many vacancies are you currently trying to fill within the agency?
In terms of the 1811 ranks, there's a few hundred open vacancies that we have funded. And so we're filling all of those with our hybrid 1811 program and our new recruitment program, and I think a lesser amount of IAs and SOS.
So if hundreds of agents have retired or taken the fork in the road offer, and you have vacancies, but you're requesting $500 million less, how does having fewer FBI agents help you tackle violent crime and address our national security issues?
Just to put it in perspective, Senator,
issues?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If we had this $500 million, we've done the math. It would take us 14 years to onboard every vacancy that's on the books currently at the FBI, because we can't hire these folks and train them overnight. It's a years-long process. So we are currently focused on recruiting the best and filling the positions to the best of our needs. And we, even if we had this extra money, wouldn't be able to hire them overnight. We're looking for where the need is greatest, where in the country we need to send them, and how we can change the training requirements, which is why I'm thrilled to have police officers. They might not have a college degree, but they got the street smarts and the cop smarts to become FBI agents, and that's what we want.
Let me turn to Section 702.
Yes, sir.
When you testified in front of the CJS subcommittee, we talked about this issue. You told me you were in favor of reauthorizing FISA Section 702 when it expires next year, so long as the reforms implemented last year, reforms like better training for agents and real consequences for inappropriate searches of Americans' communications, were maintained. You also said that you had some ideas about how to make Section 702 better going forward. Can you give me an update on the FBI's implementation of these reforms and the direction you think it should go?
Absolutely. I think you're referring to the query process, and if you're not, let me know. But any instance of abuse or mistakes that were made in the query process have now been changed. It used to be you can make multiple mistakes and continue to access the query database system. I've changed that. If you make a mistake, you're immediately sidelined, a review is conducted, and if it was an actual mistake, i.e., there should have been S on the end of that name and there wasn't, then we put you back in. But we have to review those matters. So that's happening. And if there was an intentional mistake, you have no more access to the 702 query system and its database. So we've also done an audit of the entire 702 system and the query databases. And now we are nearly 100% of the audit. And I think we found one or two, I'll have to get back to you, quote unquote mistakes within that system, which are currently being reviewed.
Thank you. You had told me in May that you'd send me updated statistics about the Section 702 searches of Americans' data. I haven't received it. When will I get that?
I'll work with my team to get that to you, Senator.
And frankly, in May, when you were testifying that you were implementing these reforms, you were also closing down the Office of Internal Auditing at the FBI. Now, that was the office created in the first Trump administration to improve the Bureau's compliance with Section 702. How is that working out? How can you continue to advocate for robust civil liberty protections but shut down the office that was created to enforce those safeguards? Help me understand this.
Absolutely, Senator. This is a great example of sort of duplicative work. There was two divisions in the FBI working on this, And all we did was the inspection division, which is the leader in this query system and this audit system, has now been given the single source mandate to conduct these. So the OIA, its elimination is just taking folks who were working there and were experts in it and folded in under the inspection division, and then taking other folks that we didn't need because we had enough manpower and pushing them elsewhere in the FBI.
I'm concerned about the rise in threats against members of our judiciary. What are you
Yes, sir.
doing with the U.S. Marshal Service to help protect our federal judges and with state and local judicial systems to help provide some of the expertise of the FBI in protecting them as well?
I share your concern, Senator. We have 35 open investigations, 17 against federal judges, and the remainder against state court judges and threats that they have received. And as you know, federally, there's a specific statute which prohibits that. So we are working up those cases and referring them to prosecution where we can meet the threshold for evidence.
In your written testimony, you referenced how counter-UAS legislation expires and we need to resolve the conflict in jurisdiction and authority. I agree, this is an urgent concern. I have heard from state and local law enforcement about it, from the folks responsible for major events, whether it's sports or concerts or public events. Given the tragic increase in political violence, I'm very concerned about the misuse of drones and the potential of there being a catastrophic event. What could we do to address this challenge?
Well, obviously, reauthorizing the capabilities that we have under the Counter-UAS program. But just to highlight what the FBI is specifically doing, we've been given the mandate to work with DHS to secure not just the Club World Cup that we had, by the way, which occurred in 32 matches across the country without any significant incident, which we're proud of, and we're taking that model for the next World Cup and also the Olympics. But the reason I bring that up is because we pushed out our counter-UAS programs to address the security needs, and that's where our focus is on events like that.
Mr. Director, thank you for your testimony. I look forward to working on actually solving criminal problems and reducing the extent to which what we're going back and forth about is more political and partisan point scoring and more actually solving crimes.